I now call the November 23rd meeting of the Wallingford-Swarthmore School Board to order. In opening, as you're willing and able, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we'll start with the roll call. Again, we have some board members participating remotely and some in person. Ms. Fagora, can you please take the roll call?
Mr. Ballas?
Here.
Ms. Semino?
Here.
Dr. Downey?
Here.
Dr. Huff?
Here.
Mr. Cudis?
Here.
Mrs. Lentz?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan?
Here.
Mrs. Walkman?
Here.
Dr. Grandy?
Here.
Mr. Berman?
Here.
Dr. Palmer?
Here.
Ms. Patel?
Here.
Dr. Grandy, you have 9 voting members present.
Thank you, Ms. Fagora. So this evening, we are going to start with the student representatives report. Ms. Patel.
Thank you. Dr. Tuck would like to extend a thank you to the many hardworking teachers and staff members at SRS. This week, we are sending a special thank you to our nurses and custodians. These hardworking individuals are always dedicated to taking care of the students and the school buildings. This year, there's even more focus on their efforts as we learn to adjust to COVID-19. The nurses are constantly on call to help with symptom tracker issues and monitor our students' health, and our custodians are making sure the playground is cleaned regularly so the kids can play each day. Thank you so much, Nurse Ashley, Nurse Robin, Miss Donna, and Mr. Pat. SRS Home and School recently dropped off a small gift for each of them as a token of our appreciation on behalf of all of the SRS families. NPE is excited to announce that we will be having a virtual book fair for our students. A portion of the proceeds will go directly to the NPE library to purchase additional books for student use. The book fair will run from November 30th through December 11th and is completely online in partnership with Children's Bookstore. Additional information will be distributed via school e-blast and will be found on our school website. West is excited to welcome author Josh Funk on Friday, December 11th. This will be the school's first time hosting a virtual author visit for West Co-War and West Online Academy students. Josh's books are great for all elementary school ages. In addition, thanks to our generous West family, $1,130 was raised for the Media Food Bank from Miss Gower's Milk and Cookie Stand, as well as a lobby full of non-perishables for families in need for City Team in Chester. Principal Savage wishes everyone a happy Thanksgiving. Strathaven Middle School had its last Home and School Association meeting of 2020 last Wednesday on November 11th. The next meeting will be held in January 2021. Meeting minutes can be found on the school website. Also at the middle school, the administration would like to say a big thank you to all students, teachers, and supportive family members for the hard work and dedication throughout the first quarter of this school year. It has been one filled with unique challenges, but we have also yielded so many benefits during these tough times. A renewed focus on instructional technology, a collaboration between students and teachers never seen before in the virtual world, and a reminder of how our schools and family support systems provide so much in the way of the overall development of our children into adolescents and then into young adults. Speaking of thanks, at Strathaven High School, National Honor Society students organized a Thanksgiving food drive to benefit the St. Catherine Drexel Food Pantry in Chester. NHS officers boxed up and delivered the generous donations from the community on Wednesday, November 18th. Thank you to everyone who donated. That's it from me. Thank you, Dr. Grandy.
Thank you, Ms. Patel. So next up, we would typically have the superintendent's report, but we're going to shuffle things around a little bit because Dr. Palmer's report is focused on the topics of our focus topics this evening. So she will cover her report as part of our focus topics. So that's why we're hopping over there. And she will join us here in the room when it comes time for the focus topic, because she needs to, or a later focus topic, because she needs to be down the hall on a computer right now. So lots of logistics. So she is here just down the hall. I do have one board announcement. The board met in executive session prior to this meeting to discuss special education litigation and negotiations. So that takes us to our focus topics. We do have 2 of them, as I mentioned, and I will ask Dr. Palmer to introduce the first.
Thank you, Dr. Grandy. And it was a little logistically challenging this evening, as I wanted to be in the room, but we thought it would be a little better presentation if Dr. Mozakowski, Dr. Citarelli-Jones, and I were all online giving the first presentation. So thank you for having us tonight, and we are delighted to be talking about our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And as I mentioned, my colleagues, Dr. Mozakowski, who is our Assistant Director of Education, and Dr. Citarelli-Jones, who is our Director of Education, are both joining me this evening to talk about this important topic. So first off, Denise, are you able to share the screen?
Yes, I am. Let's see.
As I'm looking at a
Oh,
paper
no,
copy.
I'm looking who can share. I should be able to share my screen. Let's see. All right, if you are seeing this, then we are good to go. Let's get to the beginning. Preview for all. Oh, no, I'm looking who can share. All right, there we go.
Perfect. So Denise, would you advance 1, please?
Certainly.
So I'd like to start us off and talk about how we really formed our committees. So back at the end of the school year, I had written to everyone to say that it was my desire to be able to form diversity, equity, and inclusion committees. And we did form them shortly at the, or after the end of the school year. Right now, our WSSD DEI Action Committee is 39 members. Okay, so as I was saying, we have 39 members on our DEI Action Committee. 18 are community members, 13 are staff members, with a large number of the staff members also being community members. We have 5 students, and we have 3 school board members. And I'd like to do a shout out to our 3 DEI subcommittee members, Jerry Ballas, Michelle Downey, and Kelly Walkman. And I thank everyone for the amount of time that they have put in. We have been meeting anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks since the summer. So the committee has been very, very active. And the school board subcommittee has put in a tremendous amount of time in planning for the meetings and actually attending both meetings. So my sincerest thank you to everyone who is participating in this tremendous effort at this point. Denise, would you advance 1, please? What we want to do tonight is cover what types, excuse me for 1 second on this end. Dr. Grandy, I'll wait for the green light from Mr. Citroni. Okay, I'll try again. I just got the heads up, we should be good to go. So what we want to do this evening is talk about the key initiatives or those key projects or those key items that we are working on this year that will either be completed this year or will go into next year as well. So I'm going to start us off with the first piece that we're doing is working with the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. Dr. Heather Bennett, who is their Director of Equity Services, has been working with our entire school board as well as the DEI Action Committee. The DEI Action Committee has already received one training with her, and we anticipate a second training. The school board just had its first training, and we are going to have our second training, which will actually include 2 of the modules. We've already done what is equity, and then we will do why is equity important, and then understanding and dismantling the barriers to equity workshop. It is through the work that we're doing with Dr. Heather Bennett that I anticipate that we will be in a position to come forward with an equity statement and an equity policy by the end of the school year. Denise, one more, please. Foundational to what we'll be doing is looking at an equity audit. As we start setting our goals this year, we've hypothesized where our most important needs are within the district. But to really understand what those most important needs are, is we really should do an audit in a number of different areas. So when we're looking at an equity audit, we're really looking at an organized process to talk about those difficult conversations that involve educational equity. We're also really trying to explore our underlying data to look at the data to see, are we looking at all of the 6 goals in an equitable fashion, or do we have inequity within our school system? We're really looking at having those raw conversations. And then finally, we're looking to see what we learned through the equity audit and what we can use that for to guide us in terms of setting our policies, setting our goals for the next year, and closing any gaps where we may have inequities. In terms of process, just so the community can be aware, the first part of the equity audit will have us looking at what our data is. And there are a number of different demographic areas that we will look at: aggregate data and then disaggregate data. Once we pull our data together, and we anticipate starting that as early as December, we will then work with building teams, fairly decent sized building teams, to try to dig into the data to understand why certain things might be occurring or not occurring. And then once we have the data and we've done our initial examination, then the consultant would come in and start working with focus groups. And the focus groups would involve students, teachers, and members of the community. We're looking for it to be as broad as we can to get in a variety of different voices. Then once we have the focus topics, we would anticipate that we would come back and do further data analysis, and then pare that data analysis down into ways that can be given to the board in findings. And then we can use those findings to come up with a game plan for how do we look at our equity goals over the next year and even into 5 years. So on the agenda this evening is the recommendation for Tom Stecker and Associates to perform the equity audit for us. And I'm going to be hopeful that the board will approve it. The next slide will take us into the training that we have for this year, and I'm going to hand off to Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. What I want to do is share with you, actually, I don't know why it stays on you, Lisa, so I'm going to just sort of move me to the side so people can see. So when we think about our training, one of the things we do out of the Curriculum and Education Office is we try to think about systemic professional development. And by systemic, we are looking for that professional development to not just be one-off. Instead, we're looking for it to be something that really becomes a part of our culture and a part of the way that we sort of enfold the district, both the students, the teachers, all staff, administration, into what matters to us in Wallingford-Swarthmore School District. So to start this off, in August, we had Dr. Joan Evelyn Duval-Flynn and Dr. Kathy Tashner come in to do a complete training in one day. And we broke our groups up into secondary and to elementary, and we were looking at a variety of things. And so they took us through equity and access for all students, what it means, how we define it, what it looks like. We talked about developing anti-bias environments, which is especially important when we talk about individual people. And I think, what I want to say when I say that is that everybody brings a certain bias, and understanding of what that bias is especially important. I'm trying to move this down to the bottom. You're wondering what this is happening. There we go. Also, it's important that students feel welcome and valued in their schools. So that's a piece of safety. That's a piece of feeling that they are contributing members and that it is in a welcoming space for them to go to school. And so what does that look like as well? We talked about methods for addressing and treating traumatic stress, including incidents of racism, how that can be traumatic stress for many of our students. They discussed creating a trauma-informed learning environment, which we'll talk a little bit later about how that works into this entire picture that we're pulling into focus. That has to do with social and emotional skills and wellness. And then lastly, about schools being culturally responsive and having inclusive environments. And that's for the learning, and that's so that students can feel both a part of it and reflected by what we learn, what we teach, what we value in our schools and in our curriculum. From there, we went to the next step, which was to take a look at the first year of professional development. And we embraced, starting actually with a recommendation by our teachers at the elementary level, who had come upon a teaching tolerance initiative for the Southern Poverty Law Organization, who had all of these standards that came together. And this particular group of teachers says, this is fabulous, we need to look at it. And so we like to look for things that come from all different spots. It doesn't always come from administration. Sometimes it comes from teachers, sometimes it comes from students. And so we dug a little bit into this teaching tolerance, and we were able to get trainings on the docket for this year. And then we'll also move it into next year. Now, unfortunately, our larger trainings that we wanted to do that would have been full day were compromised by COVID. And so because we couldn't have large gatherings, we were instead relegated to doing things that were all online. So this is what we've been able to do now. Next year, we'll flesh that out even more as we can start to bring more and more people together in one location. On August 21st, for example, we started with something called the Unpacking Teaching Tolerance Social Justice Standards. 30 teachers participated in that. And you'll see that that particular training, Unpacking Teaching Tolerance Social Justice Standards, was done 3 different times. It was done on September 22nd for administration and for counselors. And it will be done on May 18th with 90 staff member participants. The reason I bring this up is because it's really important to know that when you are doing any work of this type, we want to have common language. We want to have ways that people think and organize and create systems for things that have to do with the same language, that we're using the same jargon, that we are operating in the same way. So when we talk about social justice standards, I wanted to just give you a couple of examples. The anchor standards from teaching tolerance are divided into 4 different categories. There's identity, diversity, justice, and action, which is a very important step, especially when it comes to students. And when we're looking at teaching tolerance social justice standards, what's nice about this is that it is not just one class that's being taught. It's not just one, let's say in social studies is where it's going to happen, or maybe in English language arts. The idea is that it actually becomes part of the curriculum and infused into our hidden corridors of curriculum that exist in all of our buildings, which is our culture. So an example of identity would be students will express pride, confidence, and healthy self-esteem without denying the value and dignity of other people. That's an example of one of the social justice standards under identity. Under diversity, I'm going to give you an example. It is students will respond to diversity by building empathy, respect, understanding, and connection. And these are things that are not just indigenous to one subject area, but to all. Justice, here's an example for that. Students will analyze the harmful impact of bias and injustice on the world historically and today. So you can see where that might situate itself in a social studies class. It could also happen within ELA, a language arts English class. That could be another place where it happens. But it could also be something that we talk about in our PE and health classes. It might be in our art classes, in our music classes. In fact, today, music had a really great professional development session. We had a speaker who came in, and Henry Perlberg put this together for us to talk about diversity in the music classroom. It was really exciting to see that it just goes into all of our subject areas. And then the last one is action, and this is probably the most exciting of all. Here's an example of a social justice standard. This is standard number 17. Students will recognize their own responsibility to stand up to exclusive prejudice and injustice. And that is precisely what we want our students to be able to do. So by adopting these social justice standards, we're not just looking at some one-off or one piece of professional development, but instead what we're looking at is to have it be fully embedded in what we do, to be systemic in that way. So what I want to show you here is something that we are doing. I'm going to move me out of the way here a second. Something that we're doing already and what we plan to do in each one of our levels, elementary, middle, and high school. So at the elementary level, at all three of our elementary schools, we have multi-tiered systems of support. You see the acronym there, MTSS. There's also PBIS. That acronym stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Support. This program was brought in to be a way that we can have students learn things such as being safe and respectful and responsible. There's a social emotional intelligence piece to this. Things like responsive classroom and global citizenship are all part of what's being done here. And this work came from Dr. Megan McCullough, who is our director of Student Services for Behavioral Health. She began this initiative and has been working with the buildings for the full, all of last year and takes it into this year as well. So that is fully up and running. At the middle school, what's currently happening is that there are monthly social emotional learning seminars led by counselors in assemblies. And the MTSS and PBIS process will begin in January. And at the high school, what's happening currently, so you're seeing that right across that top horizontal line, is that there are also monthly SEL seminars by counselors. And there's also SAP meetings, which is our opportunity to see where our students are, especially those that are struggling. And that helps us get a look at how they are doing, both in school and emotionally and socially. What you see along the bottom section of this grid is what we are doing moving forward. At each level, we have asked the administration to put together a teaching tolerance team. After the training for all of the administrators, the building principals were tasked with forming a teaching tolerance team, and that their mission was to adopt one of the social justice standards. One of the things that we learned in our training was that you don't want to go after 20 standards all at once, that in order to change culture, you really need to do it one standard at a time. So especially during the fact that we're in a pandemic and that time is certainly being used in many, many different ways in many, many different areas, we wanted to make sure something was being done that's going to continue to move us forward and that will sustain us, so that each year 1 to 2 standards will be chosen each year by that teaching tolerance team. The goal is to create an action plan with that social justice standard in action. You heard me say that one of the domains is action. So identity, diversity, justice, and action. Action is where we make all of the learning, well, actionable. And so when we do that, we can really see how the students have learned. We can really see that they're taking it out into the world. They're taking it out into our community, that they're living these ideals, not just learning about them. And so part of this social justice standard is anti-bias education, prejudice reduction, and collective action. Those are the aims of the social justice standard under teaching tolerance teams. And that will happen at each one of our levels. So the high school, the middle school, and the elementary school all have that same mission. An example at the middle school right now is that they have chosen to make a book study for a book called Being the Change. Also, this is one that came to us from our elementary folks who found this book, really liked it. Many of us read it, thought it would be really great, and the middle school has decided to adopt this as their book study that will get them started. Most likely they'll continue that work through the year and potentially into next year, looking for other standards that will match in with that one. So I've put that there just as an example. Both the elementary school and high school and elementary schools are also looking at what they want to do with their teaching tolerance teams. But what we wanted to do was make it important at each building so that WES might have a different culture that they want to cultivate that's specific and indigenous to WES. We might find that the middle school or the high school, their teachers, their students want to have something very specific to what's going on in their buildings, rather than a blanket expectation across all 5 buildings. We thought it was important for them to have that ownership and that feeling of what matters to them and their culture, in addition to the things that we're doing outside as a district. So we don't want to leave the administrators behind. So one of the roles that I have in my job as Director of Education is to run the professional development for the administrative team. I came across this book, Culturally Proficient Leadership, when I was studying at William and Mary. It was one of my doctoral books. And it really is about a personal journey. And what I liked the most about it, which is why it's going to be our book study, is that it becomes a very real look at each person's bias. It calls out where you stand as a leader in terms of diversity and equity and the bias that we all have. And so it's very workbook in style. We are doing smaller learning communities and larger learning communities, and we'll be studying that book all year long. So we've already begun. We've had our first session. So we have different readings. There's different assignments in between the readings and the meetings. So that is ongoing. We'll be doing that throughout the year. And then we'll be taking it into next year with a look of how do we operationalize what it means to be a culturally proficient leader. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mozekowski, who is going to talk about some of the more specific and granular things that we are doing in two of our areas of curriculum, which will be ELA and social studies.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Storley-Jones and Dr. Palmer and members of the board for giving us this opportunity to talk about some of the very important initiatives we are doing through the Office of Curriculum. Creating a diverse classroom library for our students, grades K to 5, is another important initiative that we have engaged in. The concept of books as windows and mirrors was introduced by Emily Stein as early as 1968, and since then has gained great momentum in the world of literacy education. Books as mirrors are powerful because they allow students to see themselves in the text they are reading. They recognize their families, their culture, the worlds that they come from. And this fosters a sense of belonging, validates their identities, and certainly promotes their interest and improve engagement in reading. As mirrors, books offer readers a view into the lives and worlds that are different from theirs, and give a window into other experiences and other perspectives. This encourages students and all adults, everybody, to be more accepting of one another and to foster a sense of community. However, the success of books as windows and mirrors is not possible just by giving the books to teachers or to students. We have to intentionally and purposefully put the books in the hands of teachers and students have to have access to a wide range of stories and to a wide diversity of people and worlds. So again, like Dr. Jones said before, this initiative also stemmed from an interest from teachers and from attending teaching tolerance trainings, where there is a big push for having literature in the hands of students that are diverse, that speak to this multiple world perspective. And they saw this as a big, significant vehicle for diversity, equity, and inclusion for our students. So right now, with the Diverse Classroom Libraries, we're a group of 8 teachers, and we've been working together since July. I can tell you for a fact that this is a very dedicated, committed, and passionate group of educators. And just looking at their missions, at the mission statement that we came up with, can tell you just how that speaks volume and express the intention of how much we want to achieve through the Diverse Classroom Libraries. We are truly committed to increase access to inclusive books and to put them in the hands of our students. Denise, can you go on? Thank you. Like Dr. Jones said, talked about the teaching tolerance, social justice standards. Again, the books that we are selecting have also been categorized based on the standards: diversity, justice, inclusion, and action. And the process for identifying and selecting books is very comprehensive. I'm going to ask you to try to click on the rubric. If it doesn't work, I will no, I can I screen share?
I think it's set that all panelists can do it, so you can try it, Ashwin.
But I had it set up. Sorry about that. So if you look at this rubric, at this is the final sheet actually. Let me take you to the rubric first. So this is the rubric that we came up with to select books for our library. And if you look at the rubric, it has every information that you would want to have for selecting a book. The copyright year, the author's background, the illustrator's background, the appeal of the story, the appeal of the illustrations. Do the illustrations provide genuine insights? What subgroups do the books highlight? What invisible group do the books highlight? What does the book portray? Is the book historically, socially, and culturally accurate? And the synopsis of the book, whether it would be recommended for the library, and if so, at what grade level. So that's one. So having each teacher on the team, these are examples of the book titles. These are the authors. So this populates from the rubric, the teachers who've reviewed the books, whether they've had the books or not, who has done a first reading, who has done a second reading. This is a link to the recommendation of the books. And as you can see, the strand of where the book falls under identity, justice, action. And so this has taken a lot of time and a lot of investment from teachers to actually find the books, vet the books, and see where the books fit within the social justice standards and how we can use the books. And we actually had a meeting this morning as a team. And our next step right now is the team is starting to provide guidance on how to use the book in the classroom. So they are picking out the key vocabulary in each of the book, the essential questions, so that the other teachers in the grade level can hit the ground running with using the books. But we also have some more work to do with identifying the books by grade level and share this information with family members and other staff so that everybody is aware of what the books are and how they're going to be used. And like Dr. Storelli-Jones said before, part of this work is examining our own biases and our own comfort level before we can teach about these standards and teach about these sensitive topics sometimes. So this is the Diverse Classroom Library initiative that we're doing. The next one, we have started a social studies vertical team, grades K-5, and there was work done in the social studies department before in middle school and high school. And it came, again, teachers and community families have expressed some gaps in our curriculum and where we are not meeting some of the needs of our students teaching history, teaching social studies. So this initiative was relaunched in September of this year. We have a group of 8 teachers, and again, very committed, very passionate, very eager to make this work happen. So what we have found is we have a wealth of materials and resources in the district. We are now looking at aligning these materials and resources to the academic standards, namely civics and government, economics, geography, history, and students' interpersonal skills, which is also tied to social justice standards and how to infuse them throughout the 4 strands above. And if right now we are really looking at the standards, the social justice standards from teaching tolerance and how to make this relevant to our students. But we're really keeping in mind that we want materials and resources that are authentic, current, and relevant, because we want to teach them, we want to teach these materials from a very authentic lens. So these are the 2 initiatives that we have embraced from the with grade levels K through 5, and the work continues. Both teams met today, like I said before, and we realize that we have a lot of work to do, and we are committed to doing the work. And we have some growing pains. We work together very well. We work through our own biases sometimes, so our own differences, because we truly want to make this work valuable and authentic, and we want to own this work. And as you heard Dr. Palmer, Dr. Sterling Jones, and even through this diverse classroom libraries and social studies vertical team, there is a common thread, because we have embraced the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative and movement, and we truly want this to be throughout the district to be very effective and productive, intentional, and purposeful. This is why we have the common language and we have the common terms that are recurrent, because eventually we want the same. We have a common goal, which is to make this part of our district. So thank you for having us here tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Mozakowski. Dr. Palmer, is there anything more? Did you want me to end or go to questions?
I'm just about ready to go to questions, but I would like to thank the board for having all of us this evening. We still know we have work to do, but we were really excited to share where we are already. And from my view, it's an awful lot of work with a lot of dedicated people, all focused on a common goal, done in a really short period of time. So I'm excited to see us finish the work we're doing, and also to set the goals that will finish us for this year and also continue for at least the next 4 years. So Dr. Grandy, I'll bow down to this point to see if there are any questions from the board.
Great, and I know we've got most board members on Zoom right now, so questions, you can put your Zoom hand up and I will call on you, or anyone in the room here that I can see. Any questions in the room? All right, I'm not seeing any. Oh, I see Marilyn has a hand up. Go ahead, Marilyn.
So my question is regarding the book project, Books in the Classroom. Are there, I guess, sources of suggested books that this crew is starting with to evaluate, or are you guys starting from scratch?
Several of the teachers had books that they were already using in the classroom. So we wanted to make it more equitable across all grade levels, and having a common understanding of what the books are, what the genres were, what topics they were covering. Some of the books, a list already existed, but we also got a list from Teaching Tolerance, from the trainings that we went to, and Scholastic has a big collection of the books. So the books are there. It was really a question of going through that vetting process and going through a process of making sure that we are ready to have them in the classroom and being able to use a language for the development and readiness level of our students.
Thank you.
Kelly?
Just a comment, and I wanted to again thank the administration
And the folks who are part of the DEI Action Committee, as we said, there's 39 people in there, many teachers who are giving their time to the work, in addition to what we've heard about how they participate in the training and these different teams and so forth. But I especially wanted to thank publicly our students who are part of the DEI Action Committee. They have been an incredibly active group of students and sharing their experience, their views very candidly in a way that is incredibly helpful to us as we move forward. And so I wanted to acknowledge their place in all of this and hope that we have more student involvement as we move forward. And certainly when we roll out the equity audit, that student voice is so incredibly important. So I wanted to thank them too.
Thanks, Kelly. Any other comments or questions? All right, so I will again just echo what Kelly said. I know there is so much going on this year, but this is work that is so important and can't wait. And I know the administration feels the same way. So I know how hard everyone's working on this in parallel to everything else going on. And I certainly appreciate that. Dr. Palmer, I think we can transition to our next discussion for the evening related to the health and safety plan.
Dr. Grandy, would you like me to join you over there?
Yeah, that would be great. So we'll
Okay, give me
pause
1 minute.
for 30 seconds.
So Dr. Grandy, let me introduce the second focus topic as I'm looking for all of my materials here. So we have on the agenda this evening that we wanted to talk about the COVID-19 data, as well as our WSSD health and safety plan. So the first thing I'd like to do is update everyone where we are with our data. So as of last Friday, our incident rate per 100,000 rose in our Delaware County to 310.4. And our PCR positivity is now over 10%. We're at 10.47%. I have mentioned numerous times that I meet regularly with the Chester County Health Department, and I still do, with the latest meeting last week. And through it all, when we are talking with the Chester County Health Department, Jean Kasner, who is their director, has held firm that we are not at the point where we should transition to virtual learning. She's saying to hold the course with the hybrid. Now, to make you feel a little bit more comfortable, I'm going to go back over the information that I've shared with you in the past with the key things that we are looking for in terms of data. So I had mentioned that there are a number of items that would cause us to consider moving from a hybrid model to a virtual model. One of those would be linked transmissions in our schools, and we are not seeing linked transmissions in our school. We do have a number of incidents, but we are able to pinpoint where they came from, and we're not seeing transmission occur within our schools. The second piece that we would be looking at is a point where the Chester County Health Department cannot contact trace their positive cases. They are telling us that they are still doing the contact tracing and they are not having an issue with getting to the source of the positive case. The third piece, which is a critical piece, is do we have enough staff in our buildings to open our buildings? And to that end, we've been monitoring our absences, and we are not at a point where we are having a staffing issue in our buildings. At this moment, we still can adequately staff all of our buildings. And then the last piece that we would look at is, are there any mandates from the Pennsylvania Department of Health, from PDE or the Chester County Health Department that would require us to move to virtual learning? That's one I want to talk about because it's not a requirement at this point, but there was a change today in terms of what Dr. Levine spoke about. For the board's point of view, I forwarded information to the board for what is called an attestation ensuring implementation of mitigation efforts. And to give the public a little bit of background, in terms of ratings from the state, they have us based on our COVID numbers. We are either low, moderate, or substantial. And with our numbers, as almost every county in Pennsylvania, we are in the substantial range. When that occurred, we were contacted by PDE to have a meeting. I jumped on a Zoom meeting with PDE, and they told us at this point, we have moved into the substantial range with our COVID numbers, and they would recommend, according to their guidelines, that we go virtual. They pointed out that it is not an order, but that it is a recommendation based on the guidelines that they had given to us at the beginning of COVID. They also acknowledged that we work with the Chester County Health Department as our health agency. And their words during that call was to continue to work with the Chester County Health Department. And I can't stress that enough because I am meeting regularly with the Chester County Health Department, looking to see if we're at that point where we might pivot to something else. Moving forward today, what we learned during Dr. Levine's message was that she has now put through an order. And I won't read the whole order, but basically they're pointing out that there is the recognition that COVID is growing in all of our communities. And there is the recognition that school districts are in the substantial category. In the substantial category, they would recommend that we go to virtual. But in the attestation statement, they give the school districts the opportunity to go to the virtual or to continue following all of the procedures that we have been following, most particularly with the masking and other mitigation plans. And we have the opportunity to stay the course and stay in hybrid learning. And on this particular statement, they are asking from the WSSD point of view that we, meaning our board president and the superintendent, are attesting that we are following all of the parts of the planning and mitigation efforts that the Department of Health has outlined for us, and we are choosing to remain in the hybrid manner. Our other option is to move to virtual. So that was one of the pieces of information that I did forward to the board today. We just received it ourselves, and Mr. Berman and I were on a Zoom earlier today trying to flesh out what does this mean. Basically, that we are complying with everything, and we understand that according to the Department of Health guidelines, this is what they would recommend, but we have the option to still continue what we are doing. We know our mitigation efforts are working. We do have positive cases, but we don't have spread. I will have another meeting with Jean Kasner tomorrow. All of the superintendents will be on our regular call. We know we will be discussing this, but because we have our board meeting tonight, this is one item that I would like the board to take action on, so Dr. Grandy and I would be able to sign off on this. If we do not act on this, we will automatically have it acted on for us by 5 o'clock on Monday. If you don't act, you go to virtual. So I thought that is one thing that's really important to flesh out. But I thought we are monitoring every day as there is new information that comes in. As we are doing contact tracing, we look at every situation as it comes in. The community has been wonderful in contacting us if there is something going on in the community. So we are getting really quick confirmation that way, or questions, should I send my child into school? They're not feeling well. It's been really great contact with our parents. Our nurses have been doing an absolutely awesome job in terms of reach out and staying current on everything. We are in a position where we can stay the course because our mitigation efforts are working. And I thought that was the key pieces that I wanted to share with everybody tonight, that I haven't been writing a different message. It is still the same message because we are still finding that our mitigation efforts work. One other piece I haven't brought out as I've been briefing the community or briefing the board, and Mr. Abbott mentioned it to me. I don't talk about how we go through additional measures to keep our buildings clean. I haven't highlighted that, and I really should highlight that, because we do go out of our way, that if it is part of our regular cleaning, or if we find out that someone is not feeling well, it is additional cleaning. We have done everything we can in terms of mitigation efforts to keep our buildings clean, to keep our staff safe, to keep our children safe. So that's the part I'd really like to convey to everyone tonight. We're not seeing a position where we should make the shift. And in our last conversation, again with Jean Kasner, when asked, is there a particular number, a particular indicator where we would know if it reaches this number, we automatically move to another stage? And her comment was not a particular number. We need to look at the totality of everything. The schools have strong mitigation efforts in place. So I thought from that point of view, I wanted to convey that tonight. It is still the same message from me. I'm not recommending a change to a different model of instruction at this point. Dr. Grandy, I have not had a chance to talk to you, so you may have additional questions for me.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. And I'll certainly look for hands from board members for questions or comments. I would just reiterate, I think, what you said, which is I think we have, obviously, we're living through a period where there is rapidly increasing rates in the community. And I think there's a lot of concern that we all need to do everything possible to try to reverse that trend, particularly around the Thanksgiving holiday. But it does seem to be the case that in our own district, we're certainly not seeing evidence of linked transmissions. And then I think more broadly speaking, it seems that the experience of other school districts who are using some of the same strict measures that we've been deploying have also been successful. So I would just add that comment. I guess one thing that would be worth discussing briefly, or I guess I have a couple things. One is, I think a lot of people assume that all contact tracing is Chester County Health Department, but in fact, one of the things that happens in schools and the way we've designed things is we have strict seating charts, and the kids are organized in very particular ways so that if there is a case, a good deal of the contact tracing is actually happening here. Is that correct? Could you talk a little bit about that?
That is correct. We do have seating charts for our buses. We have seating charts for our classrooms, and we even have seating charts when we're in our larger areas, such as when the kids go to the library. I can tell you with certainty, it is our staff that runs down where children are. So, I mean, we are looking at the classroom, exactly where the desks are. For the board, you may not have noticed, but when we were just meeting in one of our classrooms, there were markers on the floor where the desks should be. Our teachers know where everyone is. They know by period who's sitting in the classes. If you go down into the lunchroom, you can see who sat at which table. And I can tell you, even on the buses, We are looking at our manifests, but then we're also double checking on the video. Did the children actually sit in the seat they were supposed to be seated in? So Dr. Grandy, you are correct. We are doing the contact tracing, and then our nurses provide that information to the Chester County Health Department via a spreadsheet, but we do the bulk of the contact tracing.
And I think that's important to emphasize because there's in building, in district contacts that students have, and then there's community-based contacts, and certainly it's the Chester County Health Department who does a lot of the contact tracing for things that are happening outside of school, outside of our district activities. But all the data and review of contacts in our district is all coming from us.
Correct.
Okay. I see I have a couple hands up on Zoom, so I'll start there. Kelly?
There we go. Dr. Palmer, I was wondering if you could explain, just so there's no confusion, what we mean when we say we don't have linked transmission in the schools. I know that, community members certainly know of members of, sports teams perhaps, where we had part of a team out or having test positive. So I wondered if you could explain the difference between a situation like that and what we mean by a linked transmission in schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Walkman. When we are looking at linked transmission, we may have a child in a classroom, but we won't have a second child that is linked to the first child. We are able to go back to the parents of the child and find out where the child may have picked up the COVID from. Frequently it is from a family member, or they will know where they had exposure to a positive person. So we're not seeing the spread as if we have two children who are unrelated in a classroom, or two children who might have gone to the lunchroom and they both have it. We're able to go back to where the origination is. And in terms of our teams, we have looked at different activities that have taken place, some larger gatherings that have taken place with our teams. But we are not seeing the spread when they are coming into the school, and we're not seeing the spread when they're playing the sport. We're seeing that there was a gathering that took place, and there may be a number of kids on a team, but there was a gathering that took place outside of school that brought them together. So while they're playing or they're in the classroom, we have not seen the spread. Not saying the spread couldn't occur tomorrow, but I'm saying we're not seeing it as of today.
Okay, thank you. And a quick second question, sort of related. When we're reporting in our dashboard that you have been sharing with the community, when we're reporting that our numbers that are on there, there have been questions about what those numbers represent. Are they only children who are coming into, students and staff coming into the buildings? Would it include someone participating in-person extracurriculars who may be in the online academy, but might have tested positive and was part of our online, our in-person extracurriculars, for example? And how does it compare to, I'm in online academy only, for example, and I don't come into our buildings or participate in sports at all?
So when we have a child that comes into the school, or we have a staff member that comes into the school, or the child is on campus for an extracurricular activity. So if you are on campus, that's when we're reporting someone who has a positive. If the child were solely an online academy child that was COVID positive and never came into the school building or on the school grounds for an activity, that child would not be reported. And Mrs. Walkman, I actually just updated the footnote, or asked Mrs. Abrahamson to update the footnote so it would reflect that it is anytime that a child is positive in our buildings, on a bus, or on site for an extracurricular activity. So that hopefully will make it a little bit more clear to the community. And if the community would like to know totally how many cases there are within our school district, then that's an item that they can actually look on the same page as the COVID dashboard, just a little bit lower, and they'll see the link to the Chester County Health Department. What I think throws people off just a little bit is that they talk about cases within the WSSD, and that's really within our boundary total cases. It doesn't mean it's within our schools. So any parent that lives in our community within the school district boundaries would be listed as a positive case. But I would certainly not be reporting that for a parent. And I think there's confusion what's in the community versus what's in our building or on our grounds for an extracurricular activity. So hopefully the footnote will make it a little clearer.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I've definitely heard the questions about what the Chester County Health Department reports when they're reporting that district, school district specific information. And there's a lot of confusion and people think that represents our school, and it doesn't. It represents the community, the zip codes that comprise our school district and what exists in that community. So I think it's really important for folks to understand the difference between those. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Marilyn?
I have a few questions, actually. Dr. Palmer, you brought up the case that a parent tests positive for COVID and you would not be reporting that on our dashboard. And I'm just want to confirm that if a parent tests positive, that the children in that household would likely be quarantined?
Yes.
Is that accurate? Okay.
That is most accurate. And I am appreciative when our parents do call us and tell us that quickly. They do call our
Okay.
nurses.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear, just so that that wouldn't be hanging out there like that. I also have a question for, I think this is probably for Greg Hilton, since he is here. I ask this all the time. What is the high school attendance like at the end of last week?
So the attendance, Dr. Huff, has declined gradually over the last few weeks. We saw quite a number of students choose to stay home virtually last week. We've had a little over 200 students in the building each day during Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday cohorts.
Okay, thank you. There are lots of potential reasons for that. One could be students deciding to self-isolate before the Thanksgiving holiday in their hopes and plans to visit grandparents and such. Others have proposed other reasons why that could be happening, but that does bring up the point that we do have the Thanksgiving holiday coming up this week. And what's the guidance to students and families for if they do travel for Thanksgiving and their potential to return to the buildings?
Dr. Huff, I'll take that one because I anticipate sending information out to our parents tomorrow. Everybody, whether you're a staff member or a parent or our children, we have to abide by Dr. Levine's guidance, and we have to go into quarantine if we are traveling, or we have to have a negative COVID test. And if you're not sure what to do, just contact our principal and let them know that you traveled for Thanksgiving if you have to. We hope that you don't, but if you have to, let our principal know that your family has traveled for Thanksgiving and that your child will be attending virtually. We're happy to accommodate the virtual education after the Thanksgiving travel. We would ask you first not to do the traveling, but if you have to, we'll accommodate your children virtually.
And I guess my last question for now, anyway, is regarding the attestation. I may have said that wrong. Form, which is, I guess, a waiver if we want to continue teaching in a hybrid manner rather than going 100% virtual, even though our numbers are quite high. Do we have to sign that if any portion of the district continues in a hybrid portion?
Dr. Huff, that was a considerable part of the conversation that Mr. Berman and I were on earlier. We believe if any part of our district is virtual, that we do sign it, and we just say what part of our district is virtual. Mr. Berman, do you concur?
Yeah, that was the upshot of the conversation, and that is our advice as well. If you're going to keep any part of the district in person, you would need to have that signed in order to avoid the state forcing you into an online version.
So just to clarify, signing that document does not require that we continue hybrid at all levels.
Correct.
No, it does not.
Anything else, Marilyn?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Kelly, your hand is still up. Was that from before? Or that's,
Yeah, it was, sorry.
okay. Jerry.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work that has gone on in the school to prepare for the mitigation efforts, the cleaning efforts, and then the great, excellent execution of that plan. And I really want to thank the teachers. I want to thank administration. And I really want to thank the students, because my understanding is the students are doing their part to mask, to stay apart the 6 feet that's required, and the parents for providing information and doing what they can to keep everyone safe and healthy. So I think it's great that we can continue to stay on the model we're in, and even when things around us look like are not the best and likely will get worse. And as long as we continue to really be disciplined about the mitigation efforts, and everyone supports one another in it, I think we've got a good chance to stay open. So thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, I think if I reflected back on sometime in the spring, I remember having a conversation about universal masking of students before it was a state mandate. And I think everybody underestimated our students' abilities to do all these things. And in talking to our principals and teachers, it's really remarkable in our buildings how much our students have grown accustomed to these measures, which I know are not easy. And certainly that's the case with our teachers as well. Jen, I see your hands up.
Thank you, Dr. Grande. I want to go back a moment to when Dr. Huff was talking. It might sound like splitting hairs or feel like splitting hairs, but I think it's important that we don't refer to the attestation as a waiver, because we're not waiving anything. And Mr. Berman can correct me if I'm wrong, but my reading, it's not attached to any kind of liability or anything like that. And I think just for clarification purposes, it's important to make that point. Correct, Mr. Berman?
Yeah, no, the liability piece of this is actually tied up in the brand new law that was passed by the state legislature. The issue is simply that this is an agreement to follow the guidance that's been put out by the Department of Education and the Department of Health, and that if you fail to do that, then there could be some other pieces that go along with it. No, this would not specifically be a waiver. This is simply an agreement to follow the guidance that was put out and not go rogue, perhaps.
Thank you. I also, and I know, Dr. Palmer, that you did say this, but for anyone that was half listening, I do think it's important to clarify the point that there has also not been transmission in sports as they've been playing, although sports teams at times did have to quarantine. That was due to extracurricular socializing and not the sports themselves. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And finally, I like the conversation that we had about how much contact tracing we do in our schools and in our buildings. I'm thinking of that, especially in terms of that fourth point that you made, Dr. Palmer, about the Chester County Health Department's ability to keep up with their own contact tracing, which may force us to consider a different model of education. But it sounds like from what Dr. Grande and what Dr. Palmer, what you both discussed, is that we actually do a lot of the bulk here. And they're more responsible for the outside world, so to speak. So I think that if they get to a point where they can't keep up for whatever reason, that it's important for us to also note that we're actually the ones that are pioneering that effort within the buildings based on what I just heard from your discussion.
That is correct.
Okay, that's great. All right, thanks so much. That's all I have.
I have a couple more things, but let me see if anyone else in the room has anything. No. All right, Larry, go ahead.
Just a comment. Important part of mitigation efforts is contact tracing. I've heard some stories about students and or family members not cooperating or not providing timely cooperation with contact tracing. I just feel that is such an important aspect of the mitigation efforts that if I don't believe that is happening across the board, that will affect my decision on how I decide to continue curriculum, continue extracurricular activities and sports. I think it's very important.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that is so much of this pandemic requires everyone to really work together and to, if you get into a situation where you think you've been exposed or you get into a situation with a positive test, it's just a moment to try to really help the community and help everyone around you through prompt notification and allow contact tracing to be done so that people can stay safe. And so I would agree with that plea to the community to try to help as much as possible. Marilyn, I see hand up.
Yes, I think it is particularly important that the families and the communities have confidence in the safety of sending their children to school, so that they continue to do so that we have adequate class sizes in the school building. I know that at the high school level, the population of the school has declined, and multiple reasons for that, and we don't necessarily ask people why they're switching. Likewise, the population in some of the elementary classes is also quite small, which has some advantages for social distancing, but has some disadvantages for staffing, in that we're using more teachers than we need to at the elementary school as classes shrink, and we need to think about that. So if we can communicate more effectively about the transmission within this, about the lack of transmission within the schools, that will be beneficial to everyone. At the same time, we do have the Thanksgiving holiday this week. We also have college and university students returning to their homes. And so even if families are not traveling over the holidays to visit families, that we do have others coming to visit them. So we are running into a period of time where vigilance is incredibly important, and being very careful is very important. I very much would advocate for going 100% virtual at the high school level for 2 weeks, primarily because a large fraction of these students at the high school have siblings that are returning home from college and university, which, as much as colleges and universities are trying to mitigate the spread, that is a dangerous time.
Thank you, Marilyn. Anyone have any other comments or questions? I'm going to jump in with one here. So I did want to pivot and just raise the question about where do we stand? So Jen brought up the fall sports season, and I know Mr. Clancy is on the line, and I want to understand a little bit about where we are in the timing related to PIAA, Central Athletic League. I know in the fall, there was a Central Athletic League plan that was ultimately agreed upon by the districts, and is what ultimately guided the practice and competition schedule through our fall sports season, as well as a number of safety and mitigation measures. Where do we stand right now with respect to the timing and sequencing of a winter sports season?
Hello, Dr. Grandy. Thank you for the question. Under the PIAA calendar, the winter sports season began this past Friday on November 20th. As a league, we all agreed that we would wait until after Thanksgiving to begin the winter sports season. So the earliest practices for most teams in our league will be November 30th. There's one or two schools that did do tryouts this past weekend with the intention of slimming down their rosters so that they weren't having kids linger on, but they also intend to really make after Thanksgiving the primary start of their season. Having said that, we're not as unified as we were in the fall. Different districts are in different places. So right now, I would say there's about 5 schools that are ready to start practice on November 30th. There's about 4 schools that are not clear to start until mid-December for practice. And there's a couple of schools that are still in limbo like us. So, we're all in slightly different places at this point.
And what is the, I know in the fall, we did ask our athletes in, particularly in higher contact or indoor sports, to be masked. And I know there's a universal masking order in place right now across the board. So what have been the discussions? I assume everyone plans on complying with that mandate at the state level. I know there's some questions about that around a couple of sports.
That's correct. We certainly wish to comply to the best of our ability and make sure that we are offering a safe environment. So I won't go into all the details of each of our sports, but we likely will be masking for basketball. That seems to be a common thread throughout our league. Swimming will be masking up until they are entering the water. So anytime they're on the deck, they will be masked. Buses and same thing, but they can't mask underwater for safety reasons. Wrestling is a point of concern as well. A lot of the athletic directors and coaches in the wrestling community are concerned about the safety of masks during wrestling, that if you're performing certain moves, that could move the mask either out of the way and you'd have to stop the match to readjust in order to cover the nose and mouth, or it could move it up into covering the eyes and create concerns there. We are looking at ways to modify and make our coach pointed out there's a t-shirt model that has a mask kind of sewn into the collar. So that might be a way to have a uniform that would have the mask built in, a little more stable during a wrestling competition. But we're cognizant of the intentions of our fellow members of Central League, and we'll be communicating about where we are with masking with wrestling as well. In terms of the other sports competitive spirit, our cheerleading squad, there's some concerns about masking during stunting. PIAA mentioned that for most of the routine, they should be masked, but when they're performing stunts, when they're doing somersaults and things, they could clip the mask and cause a safety concern with that. Our indoor tracks coaches are against having indoor meets this year, so they will likely be outside for the duration of the winter season. And our final winter sport, unified bocce, is not organized through the league. It's run through Special Olympics. We have not heard any updates from the Special Olympics about that for the season yet, but we would imagine they would mask the entire time.
And for the schools that are starting in mid-December, does that affect any kind of eligibility for postseason play?
Sure. So, our league has had a lot of conversations about this. At one point, we were pretty unified looking at the November 30th start date. Then there's another meeting among principals where they want to push it back a little more, where the first game would have been January 18th. And then when we looked at the calendar, if you have your first game January 18th, you'll only have 5 basketball games when you need a minimum of 11 for any postseason opportunities. So similar to the fall, each sport's a little bit unique. Basketball, You do need to get a minimum of 11 games in before any postseason possibilities. Wrestling, there's not the same minimum for individual postseason. Technically, you could go into the postseason without having a match. That's happened before where a kid was injured early, during the preseason practices, and they came back in time for districts and states. Same thing with swimming. I don't believe there's a minimum for the individual postseason. Competitive spirit, the competitions there are most likely going to have some kind of virtual component where teams are sending in videos.
Thank you. And then this might be a question better for Dr. Palmer, I'm not sure, but one of the concerns with resumption of athletics, obviously, indoor risk is significantly higher than outdoor settings. If there's a case on a team, even in the case of outdoor sports, generally speaking, the health department has quarantined entire teams. And so I guess my question is, how many teachers do we have coaching? Because one of the questions would be, do we run the risk of staffing shortages if we have multiple teams quarantined? And so I know we have some sports that have outside coaches that aren't teachers in the district. We have some sports, and I know we don't even know who all of our coaches are, but in general, in the winter season, do we have many in-district teachers who are coaching versus external folks historically?
Historically, we have not. To give you an idea, I asked Mr. Abbott to pull this together. So for the PIAA plan that they have for winter sports, they cover basketball, wrestling, swimming, and cheer. So if we look at what we had last year, we would have had 18 coaches, but only 7 of them are our teachers.
Okay, thank you. And then I don't know if, again, it's a little confusing to me how there's certain measures that are put forward by PIAA, and then there were certain things that the Central League agreed on as a league last fall. And I believe some of the districts that have proceeded have done so waiting on the Central League to try to come to some agreement, but at least have temporarily adopted PIAA's return to play. At the same time, I think we had different spectator requirements, for example, in the Central League than what PIAA had said. There was some differences, I guess, is the point. And one of those, I think, was spectators. Is that true? And if so, do we know what the decision would be on spectators in the Central League?
Sure. So my understanding is the PIAA basically used the governor's metrics of a 20% capacity based on the size of facility. In our league, we went a little more stringent than that. We issued 2 passes for every participant to allow for home contests. Most schools in our league said only senior parents of the visitors or senior participant passes for the visiting team could attend. So for example, when our football team was on the road, we only had 9 seniors. So while we had 45 members of the roster, only 9 players could have their passes valid at a visiting facility. We were allowing all participants passes. Okay, so we allowed 2 spectators per participant along with Garnet Valley. Both of us felt that our gymnasiums and our stadiums could accommodate that. We have approximately 3,500 seats in our stadium when we're not socially distancing. So we were able to do the math and realize that in our highest capacity, for a football game, we're 2 per cheerleader, 2 per band member, 2 per visiting and home football player. We still had room in our stadium. So we expect most schools will have a similar policy in the winter, allowing 2 spectators per participant in their gymnasiums for the home team. And it's most likely that visiting teams will only be allowed to bring senior participant passes.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if you would know the answer to this. Maybe Dr. Palmer would. Have some districts, like as we get into these I mean, there's multiple dimensions of risk in the winter. Again, one is being indoor. The second thing, of course, is just the community rates are profoundly higher now than they were when we were engaged in our fall sports. Have other districts required their athletes who decide to play to be online only in their online academy or virtual education model?
Yes, I believe there are some other districts that have made that distinction that, in order to participate in winter athletics, some for specific teams. I can't remember off the top of my head which schools. I know Radnor did that in the fall for football, and I believe they're doing that for wrestling in the winter as well, but I could be mistaken on that.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments from other board members? Jen?
Are we discussing sports now, Dr. Grandy?
I think this is meant to be, I mean, during this focus topic, we can have a fairly expansive conversation that includes, our instructional models, but also sports. If we, as of right now, there's nothing on the agenda this evening to vote on sports. So now would be the time to discuss it.
Okay, I do have some questions, I would say, for Pat Clancy. Mr. Clancy, do you know which of our neighboring school districts has approved sports so far?
Yes, I believe Ridley, Springfield, Garnet Valley, Haverford, and Pencrest have all approved so far. Conestoga has not approved yet. They went virtual, so they are not participating in sports while they're in virtual through the Thanksgiving break and after Thanksgiving. Lower Merion School District denied their school's health and safety plan for winter athletics, and they cannot reconsider that until their December 6th board meeting. Marple Newtown, I think, was still in discussions, and I can't remember off the top of my head who's left there. Upper Darby, I believe, is also in kind of a delayed start. They don't intend to start practice until around mid-December, and I believe Radnor's in the same boat.
It's also true that Upper Darby hasn't even gone back into the buildings, I don't think. So
that's correct.
They're on
They're still in a virtual learning instructional model.
Okay. Interborough?
I am not familiar with where the Del Valle League is right now. They did not participate in the fall season, and I believe they have, some other logistical challenges for the winter.
Okay, and Lower Merion, I should know this, but is that high school in Montgomery County?
Yes, them and Harriton are in the same school district in Montgomery County.
Okay, so they're under different constraints than we are right now anyway, right? So that's kind of a different trajectory as well.
Mm-hmm.
But our neighbors that are in Delaware County, you named 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that have definitely approved winter sports.
That's correct.
Okay. And of those that have approved them, do you know how many are online? I know you said you weren't sure which ones, but do you know how many are online?
I believe they are all at least in a hybrid model at this time. Dr. Palmer may know a little more, but I believe they're all in hybrid still.
I guess let me rephrase that. Do you know how many have required their athletes in the winter sports and which sports to go online, even if you don't remember the particular school?
Of those schools, I do not believe any of those 5 schools have required their athletes to participate virtually.
Okay, in their education.
Correct, for classroom learning.
Okay, and aren't there 3 winter sports that are scheduled to start practicing before the end of November? I was told that there were.
So the 3 sports there's 4 sports in our league that our league offers competitions for: basketball, wrestling, swimming, and competitive spirit. Competitive spirit is really just the Central League Championship, which takes place after the District 1 championship in February. So basketball, wrestling, and swimming have been where the bulk of our conversations as a league have been.
And aren't they all scheduled to, and track, isn't track another?
So indoor track is not run by the Central League. Basically, there's a coaches association that traditionally has rented out indoor tracks to host their meets. So they've gone up to Lehigh frequently, Haverford College and Ursinus. And basically the coaches have organized those events themselves. So our league does not have an indoor track schedule. And again, around the league, you'll get varying responses as to which schools are okay sending their kids to Glen Mills for a meet at Glen Mills indoors. There's others that are saying, they're not doing any meets. They're just, going to give coaches reduced salary to have training outside. So indoor track, there's a lot of variation right now.
All right. And as RAD, I'm sure that you know that all of these sports, especially wrestling, has been going on in club form for months and months and months. It's been going on in the summer. There was a huge tournament this weekend. Okay. I just want to make sure we all understand that regardless of our decision of this school, this is all going on and it's all been going on. Would you agree with that, Mr. Clancy?
Sure. Obviously.
It's a fair statement, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously, our athletes participate in club sports as well as interscholastic athletics. So when there isn't a school team going, they often do, find a club team to join.
But there's usually a fee that's associated with those clubs, if you know, right? I mean, that's my understanding.
That's correct. Those club sports usually have a fee associated, but we do not charge our athletes.
Right. So our school isn't a pay to play, of course, if you're a student, but those club sports, which again have been going on all throughout COVID, are pay to play.
Correct.
Okay. And is there a reason why, if we were going to go forward with winter sports, why we would delay? Because I do have real concern for the students and their ability to, regain their identities, thrive in sports if this board were to approve them, and to also thrive in their academics, because we know from history that those two get tied in pretty well for students. Is there a reason why we would delay and then risk jeopardizing any postseason for sports that may be able to engage in that?
Again, I think that's going to be the board's decision. Clearly, I've often said this is a different ask from the fall. I recognize that the indoor nature of these sports is different than our outdoor fall sports season. I was listening intently to Dr. Palmer earlier when she said we're at 310 cases per 100,000 people. We were at 46 when we approved fall sports on September 21st. So we're close to 7 times the case rate that we had for fall sport. So I understand if there's need for caution because of the case rates. In terms of our protocols, that I do trust our coaches to follow through on our mitigation efforts. If we delay, I don't think we're too far behind some of the other schools that delay. I think as long as we can get started practicing by like December 8th or 9th, I think we'll be able to have the minimum number of contests for postseason for basketball and several of these individual sports that may not have the same implications. But there is an advantage to starting practice sooner, also for the health and safety of the workouts. We have not allowed our winter sports inside yet. So for example, our basketball team has been practicing outdoors. We're getting into cold weather, and there's challenges with that, and the impact on student athletes' bodies. And the outdoor courts also don't have as much space as our gymnasium. We have a rather large gymnasium. I believe we have 10 baskets in our gym, whereas there's only 3 on the outdoor court that we're using right now. So we actually can spread our athletes out more in the gym than we can outside right now.
It's also my understanding that the outdoor courts don't have lights.
We are facing daylight issues, correct?
Which is significant and a reasonable hurdle that there's no way to rationalize around that now that it's getting dark so early. So I guess, for this board, I guess I am wondering about the delay. If we could go back and we could think back to when we were handling the fall sports and those decisions, I think that was a decision that felt scary for every board member. I know that myself, who voted for fall sports, you always take those votes. I think every board member takes those votes extremely seriously, because the last thing I think any member of this board wants to do is walk any adult or child into a bad situation. But with that said, I think looking back, we know that maybe on some of these things we should have hopped a little sooner, especially with maybe predictions. We don't know how the winter's going. And it just seems to me that this would be a decision that would be good to make in the shorter term, especially based on how successful we were in the fall, and that, you know, I think we need to give credit where it's due to those students and those coaches who took the social distancing guidelines extremely seriously. So, you know, I don't know, Dr. Grandi, where this is meant to go tonight. I'm not sure I understand the delay. If there's a definite, if there's definitely no risk to any postseasons with a delay, but I hear everything that seems to counter why a delay would be good, to be honest with you. I don't, especially since we're behind 5 other schools and our athletes have not been practicing in the proper climate or the proper conditions for these sports.
Kelly, I see you have your hand up.
I had a question about swimming, and Mr. Clancy, if you're able to comment on this one. I'm wondering if they're doing anything with reduced lanes. The lanes and the way they are put together certainly doesn't provide a 6-foot distance, and now you're talking about doing that unmasked. So when they're actually swimming, are they doing every other lane as an accommodation for that, perhaps?
So first of all, I believe the lanes are 6 feet wide. I don't know the exact dimension, but I believe it's closer to 7 feet for the width of the lanes themselves. They're pretty wide. But in terms of, you know, mitigation efforts at practice, the USA Swim Federation has put out guidelines and suggestions. One of them is having no more than 4 athletes per lane and having half of the athletes start at each end of the pool. So you can run the same workout, but only 2 people at each end. So that way they're not bunched up as much, you know, in between sets. Swimming has been a sport that we've had high participation in the past. We may need to limit participation in order to, you know, follow the proper safety protocols for this season. No one wants to institute cuts, but by the same time, you know, we really are looking at a maximum of 24 people in the water in any given practice. So there may need to be some limitations this year if we see high demand.
Okay. Yeah, my extended family is competition swimmers, and so when I think about those lanes, I think about what happens at the end of the lane when you're done, and they're hanging on the ropes, they're breathing on each other and breathing heavy, and so not going to every other lane is going to create a very significant oversight issue, I think, in order to make sure that we don't have ourselves hanging over the lanes talking to each other and breathing on each other. So I just bring that up for consideration.
Sure. With swimming and several other sports, there are some timing and facility limitations. So if we went every other lane, we're talking about 12 swimmers, per practice. Most of our coaches have said that you need a minimum of about 17 in order to field a full team during the swim meet. Ideally you would like to have your whole team practicing together because you're trying to minimize the number of practice shifts. We usually have a boys practice and a girls practice and a diving practice all on 3 separate shifts. If we try to divide them up further, we'd be extending deeper into the night.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful to understand. Thank you.
Sure.
Dr. Huff?
So I get to learn something about swimming tonight, which I did not realize I was going to get to learn about. You mentioned there were 4 swimmers per lane during practice. Can you just explain a little bit more about what you mean by 4 swimmers per lane?
Sure. So again, the idea is that we have 6 lanes. They're about 6 or 7 feet wide, but with 4 swimmers in each lane. The lanes are 75 feet long. It's a 25-yard pool. If 2 of the swimmers start at the shallow end of the pool, at the 4-foot end, and 2 start consistently at the deep end, at the 12-foot end of the pool, that way they're not going to all be bunched up together at one end between sets. So most of our swimming workouts, they're doing things on timed intervals. So maybe they do, a 4-lap set, in a minute, 15 seconds or something like that. And between those sets, there's some downtime where they can catch their breath. If they were all starting from the same end, then you'd have about 24 people on one end of the pool. But by staggering them so that they're starting on separate sides of the swimming pool, it limits the number of people that are in close proximity.
Okay. So when you say there are 4 swimmers per lane, how many are in the water at a time?
We'd be talking about 24 swimmers. I can do quick math here.
No, I mean per lane.
Sure. So 2 on each end of one lane. And again, I believe the lanes are about 9 feet wide, because I know 8 lanes is 75 feet. So basically, they're not quite enough for 6 feet apart there, but if they're spread out using the lane lines where some are staggered a little further back from the wall, you should be able to, keep people relatively spread if you have the team starting at both ends of the pool instead of starting at one end.
Okay, I didn't really mean to go quite that much down a rabbit hole. I apologize for that.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Matt? Sorry, I forgot to look up.
It's okay. I've been throwing my hand up every once in a while. I just want to make sure I sort of have this all straight in my head. So what I'm hearing is that the Central League doesn't yet have a return to winter sports plan, but Pennsylvania does. So if we were going to approve anything tonight, it would be Pennsylvania's plan. That would allow our student athletes to start practicing on Monday instead of waiting until early December. But there's no contests currently on the schedule, and there's no impact of waiting in terms of potential postseason play. So do I have that all synthesized correctly, Mr. Clancy?
Pretty close. So just to clarify, our league did not create a league-wide health and safety plan similar to the last one because most of the provisions in that are similar. Okay, just obviously an indoor environment changes some of the dynamics, but we are expecting all officials to mask. We're expecting people to mask on all bus rides, and a lot of those protocols from the fall would apply to our winter season as well. In terms of the league schedule, we did build out a schedule that would start assuming that practices started on November 30th, but we also made sure that everyone in the room was clear that schedule is going to adapt and change. There will be teams that get quarantined. There will be, other, modifications for teams that start late. Okay. The fall season was, I would say, a success. I did the tabulations for the league and shared with other athletic directors. We had 420 scheduled varsity contests this fall. 412 of them were completed on time. Were completed throughout the season. There's some reschedules, but yeah, we had a 98% completion rate. So while we hear a lot about the cancellations, most of the fall went well, but the winter's different with the indoor environment. So the first games are scheduled for December 18th. And then there's games also scheduled on December 23rd. Now, my understanding is our buildings will be unavailable during the 2-week winter break. So those games scheduled for the 23rd will already likely be rescheduled. And every other school in the league understands there's going to be local accommodations that need to be made based on when teams start and so forth. We've also reached the conclusion we probably will not have an equal number of games between schools. And we're okay with that because in the fall, we allowed for a league tournament at the end of the season so that all teams could compete for the championship at the end. And the offset in the number of games gets evened out then because if all teams make the tournament, if you were taken out of the equation for 2 weeks in the middle of the season, you won't be penalized for that in terms of, a chance to compete for a championship. You'll still go to the postseason of the league postseason, not District 1.
Okay. I'm a big proponent of our athletic programs. I always did a sport every season growing up, and part of that, it's not because I was a star athlete by any stretch of the imagination. I just did better academically when I had that athletic diversion. And so I absolutely want to see that happen. But I have huge reservations about moving our sports indoors with everything we know about the virus and transmissibility.
Chapin?
I guess that's a good segue to me too. I mean, I'm a three-sport high school athlete too, one per season, and I couldn't agree more. But I just don't understand how we could be talking about putting kids together indoors, less than 6 feet apart for extended periods of time, like wrestling, and we're not having kids sing standing next to each other. I don't understand why one's on the table and one isn't. And I don't understand why 6 feet is a rule unless and until it comes to this. So I'm wondering if the medical experts have weighed in on indoor sports. Are we going to have more time to get more information from experts about this? Nobody wants to see our kids suffer. The parents of the athletes, I'm sure, have decided it's safe or they wouldn't be wanting this for their kids. So I just feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions. In the comparison between, say, something like wrestling again and something like chorus, I don't understand why one is happening and one wouldn't be if it's safe. So I don't feel like I have remotely enough information, and I didn't think we were voting on anything tonight.
And to be clear, there is nothing on the agenda tonight to vote on sports. I think there was some questions raised about the timing of when the board needed to act if there was going to be a resumption of play. And so part of the reason for having this conversation tonight during this focus topic was to give the board an opportunity to begin this discussion, decide if there was a feeling that action was needed tonight, and that action could be yes or no tonight, or we do have a board meeting on December 7th where we could take this up at that time. But the goal of having this on the focus topic was not to kick the whole conversation to December 7th, but to figure out if it's something we want to take up tonight.
Okay. And then I guess I can just request that if we do take it up, you know, when we take it up again, can we have more information about what the experts are saying about athletic competitions indoors versus things like chorus and other things that we've been told kids can't do, we can't do, and you know why the exception to the 6 feet rule. I just don't really, I don't get it.
Yeah, and I think that you'll be hard pressed to find someone to say that the risk is not increased engaging in indoor sports where there's close contact. You know, the question, you know, and I think from a board perspective, you know, I think we have, of course, we have to think about two things. We have to think about the health and safety of all of our students, including our athletes. And then we also have to think about whether athletic competition creates additional risks for other students in the schools, for staff in the schools. I think both of those things are relevant to this conversation. But I think you'll be hard pressed to find people in the medical field right now, given the rising rates, that would enthusiastically support lots of indoor competitive high contact sports right now.
Right. And I mean, I get that we haven't seen transmission in sports yet, you know, knowing that those were outside and this is inside. So I don't need to be reminded of all of that. And there's part of me that thinks, okay, let them try, and then we'll shut it down if it doesn't work, you know. But then I want to hear the explanation for why aren't we doing that with everything? Why is sports getting this and not other extracurricular activities like band and chorus, et cetera? I don't understand the difference, and I would like to know that. So that's what I'm thinking about as we head into the decision.
Sure. I will say that, and then I'll get to, I see there's a couple more hands. I will say that there's some very well documented high risk issues around singing in particular, but also presumably translating to musical instruments. Because with COVID, obviously one of the biggest concerns is the degree to which you aerosolize respiratory droplets in the air. And so,
right.
So there's some very, there's a very vivid example from a chorus where there was aerosolization that infected almost an entire choir early on during the COVID pandemic. So I think that all of these things, the nature of the risk and exposures are unique to the activity. They're unique to the number of people. They're unique to mask, no mask, proximity. Everything has some nuance to it. And I think with respect to a lot of these youth sports, I think a lot of what we're facing right now is people trying to, predict a little bit what the risk is, because in many cases, these things are just getting underway and we don't really have great data to answer that question. Marilyn, I see your hand is up.
So if we were to vote on something related to athletics tonight, would we be voting at the level of allowing practice to start without necessarily voting to allow us to enter a competitive season? I mean, because those are two different things and two different levels of exposure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can certainly choose our own path. I think that if I were to think about and maybe Dr. Palmer, I need your help here, but if I were to think about like Rose Tree Media, for example, adopted the PIAA plan, but that plan doesn't really specify any particular dates. It's more all the safety measures that go into place for each individual sport, as opposed to saying Wallingford-Swarthmore School District is going to start practicing on November 30th, December 7th, December 14th. So, we can attach whatever parameters we want. If we were to, for example, approve the PIAA plan, we could attach a begin of practice date. We could, have a begin of competition date. That the beginning of competition date could be in the future when we know we'll have board meetings between now and then. All of that's, on the table if we choose to take it up tonight. Jen? Sorry, Dr. Palmer, that was correct, right?
That was correct.
Okay.
So, Shape, and I also was thinking when you were saying, why not chorus and why sports? Because I do recall at the beginning of this pandemic, the however many, and I think it was on the West Coast of a singing group that had been greatly infected during a chorus session. So that comes to my mind first when I think why this and not something like chorus. But with that said, I understand what you're saying. You want to hear from experts. That would not be me. That would be just someone understanding and remembering that that was something we talked about a lot and that the news talked about a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, that singing session. The other thing is that, I don't think any sports parents are saying, let's play sports. It's safe. I think that everyone has decided what is a risk benefit for their lifestyles. And I don't think that there is one person in this nation that hasn't made that assessment for themselves to some degree. I think it would be disingenuous to say that we're all looking at the numbers and following them strictly, because we've all decided what is worth a risk. I mean, if you've left your house at all since March, you've decided that that was worth the risk. And no one, I'm looking at Dr. Palmer and Dr. Grandy sitting next to each other. No one could even say that that's 100% safe, but it's worth the benefit of having this school board meeting based on the risk that is perceived based on what we know. And I think that, it's great to get the experts here. I've always enjoyed hearing from them. But what I think we all have to be mindful of is that when they come, they talk about one side of this equation. They talk about the risks of COVID. They don't talk about the benefits of sports. They don't talk about the benefits of in-person learning. And they don't know the struggles that our students are facing every single day with their identity being taken since March. And we've never given it back. So I don't want to go off on a tangent there, but I'd love to hear that too, but you have to always keep in mind that that's only one portion of
right, Jennifer. And there are other kids with their identities that aren't being able to do the same things. It's not just sports kids, it's other kids too. And I don't think that you're making faces at me now. I don't think you and I are going to be able to, totally agree or disagree. And you might think I've made up my mind one way, but I haven't. I'm raising some equity concerns that I think a lot of people have and aren't expressing. And so you can disagree with me for all of your reasons, and I've heard them, but I think we probably should, you should allow me to want expert information if that's what I think is needed, and not argue with me about it.
I actually don't think we're saying different things, and I don't think I'm arguing with you. And one thing I would never do is make faces at you or anyone else. That's not something I would ever do.
Grandy, may I say something, please?
Yeah, well, with all due respect, Jerry, I'm speaking and I'm not finished. So I would never do that. It might just be my face. I apologize for that. But I think we're saying the same thing. I also said that experts are helpful, but they only come in with an expertise in one area. So going on, I think that the timing matters. That's what we're hearing from everyone. The timing matters. And I'm wondering why we need to even wait till the 7th. It doesn't sounds like this is too big to tackle tonight, but I'm wondering if November 30th might be a more reasonable day to address this. And, since we brought up equity, I mean, we just heard about diversity and equity and inclusion. And I do not think it can fall on deaf ears that all of these sports have been going on. We are fooling ourselves to think that all these sports haven't been going on indoors. We heard from a parent a couple meetings ago whose son organized his own basketball league. We know that other districts have had their auditoriums open for sports. We heard from Pat Clancy, who said we can actually social distance a little better inside with 10 baskets. So when you talk about equity, what's going to happen is what's been happening, which is that the kids that can pay to play are going to get to play. And the kids that can't pay to play are going to be disadvantaged. And so when you want to bring up equity, I think that that's something else we should be thinking about. The equity in knowing that sports are happening and knowing that our students are participating in them, regardless of what we vote on, and knowing that there are some kids that are left out. So I'm done now, Jerry. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I think we've discussed this extensively, and if somebody wants for us to take some action, it would be nice to put in a motion, either to recommend starting practice or recommend meeting on the 30th, and let's decide what do we want to do and then move on.
I like that idea very much. So why don't we close out this focus topic discussion? When we get to curriculum, there'll be an opportunity if we need to bring any motions forward. But before I do that, we've been spending the last good bit of time on athletics. I just want to make sure there's no other questions or comments related to where we started this conversation around our instructional model. Okay. All right. So thank you. Dr. Palmer, did you have anything else here?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. So that takes us to our time for audience recognition. As I mentioned in prior board meetings, we have two methods to comment, in person and by phone. Anyone wishing to make a comment by phone, as usual, can call 610-892-3470, extension 1102, to leave a recorded comment for the board, subject to a 3-minute time limit. Comments left prior to 5 o'clock today have been transcribed and made available to the board. Any comments made after 5 o'clock but prior to the end of this meeting will still be transcribed, distributed to the board, and made a part of the record, but will not be acknowledged during the meeting. Before I get to the in-person comments, I think we have 2 called-in comments. I've asked Larry to read those during the meeting.
Dr. Grandy, I think those comments are for other topics.
Got it. Okay. Thinking of the topics of those. Okay. I'm trying to, let me look real quick because I think what's on the agenda, not on the agenda, is a little more difficult to tell tonight. Why don't we just for this evening?
Absolutely.
Just read them.
We have 2 topics here, or 2 submissions. First one is from a Allison Garfinkel, Dartmouth Circle, Swarthmore. My daughter, Abigail Garfinkel, is in the 1st grade in the online academy. She usually attends SRS. I'm calling because I'm really upset about the specials. My daughter has synchronous specials 2 times a week, and I just listened to her art teacher explain to the students how to access their assignments in Seesaw. She spent 50% of the lesson time, at least the first 15 minutes, explaining to them where their assignments are and that none of the class have completed their assignments yet. I just think this is completely ridiculous and unreasonable for 6-year-olds to understand where these assignments are. And basically, this is just a lot of work dumped onto the parents. I can't get through all this. Yes, I can discuss this with their teacher on a one-to-one basis, but I don't think any of us should have to. You know, complete assignments for 4 different specials that are not offered synchronously when we have reading and math and everything else as it is. I can barely get through the necessary assignments for my daughter in Seesaw, and it's becoming a struggle, and I just can't fathom also doing this for 4 specials. These children were just told that if they don't complete all these assignments by Christmas time, that they're not going to get their points, whatever that means. And then a child raised her hand and said, "Are we going to do any art today?" And that's exactly how I feel. I'm just really upset about this, and I think it's unreasonable for 6-year-olds to be expected to access all the assignments on their own. And not only that, but be penalized if they're not completed by Christmas time. So I really appreciate a discussion of this at the next board meeting, because I know I'm not the only parent struggling with this. Second submission from Thomas Pappy, Morris Lane, Wallingford. I'm calling to leave a message regarding the upcoming Strathaven wrestling season for the 2020-2021. My son is a varsity high school wrestler who is currently recovering from leg surgery. He loves his teammates. We love our coaches. I initially expressed my concern about going forward with the season to the school board, but after further consideration, I believe that these students have a right to try to have the season. Our coaches are passionate, our parents are committed, and as long as the students follow the safety measures set in place by the coaching staff, they should be given a chance. This is particularly true of the seniors. I was initially skeptical based on my experience with public health and currently the situation with my son in the hospital, having his therapist contract COVID. But I think these seniors have a right to have a season, and we have a right to try with the proper precautions in place. Other teams are allowed to participate, and our wrestling team should have an opportunity to participate if the other Strathaven high school teams are allowed to participate. Should there be a continual uptick in cases and people start contracting the virus, we may have to reconsider. But I think at this point, I would be in support of a modified wrestling season for these students at the high school. So this is Thomas Pappy, leaving my public comment for the upcoming school board meeting. Thank you and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
All right. Thank you for those comments, and thanks, Larry, for reading those. And then, of course, we also have time for comments in person for members of the public wishing to address the board. If anyone would like to address the board, I would say that normally, again, we separate out things that are on the agenda versus not on the agenda. Now is the time for things on the agenda. However, I would say we're having a pretty broad conversation about the health and safety plan, so as well as athletics. So if anybody has a comment they'd like to make to the board, I think we can do that now. If you do have a comment, I would just ask that you go out in the hallway and enter into the room over here. And then there's some, I think, little footprints on the floor to keep our distance. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment? All right, welcome.
Hi.
So if you don't mind just stating your name and your address, you don't have to give your house number, but just the street you live
Yep.
on.
Kelly Kegel and Beach Road in Wallingford. So initially, some things I wanted to say have changed a little bit based on some of the things that I've heard tonight so far. I want to start by encouraging parents from theater, music, that they should reach out to, if they have not already, but continue to reach out to the board and to administration in an effort to see their children have that opportunity. So I am speaking specifically for wrestling. My messaging is for all of the winter sports and opportunities for all of the children, but specifically to wrestling. I will start by clarifying that the PIAA did, in fact, move forward, approving practices 11/20 and competition to begin 12/11. And then they set in guidelines, additional guidelines, and one specific to wrestling as well. The Central League then has their own plan, which, as Pat mentioned, practicing starting 11:30. I am confused as to why this wasn't on the agenda to be voted for to begin with, which prompted me to really show up tonight, because especially considering that in enough time to add it to the agenda, we had learned that the 5 very close districts to us have all approved to start sports and have already started. So it's disappointing that we know that sports has been a big issue as important to the kids, and that I know our athletic director is also aware of the schools that did approve it, that we didn't bring this to tonight's meeting for a vote. So I don't know all of the rules, but I would hope that we would, I don't know, have an emergency meeting or do what needs to be done to have us join the other schools that have also agreed to move forward. I also think that fall sports, which I understand everybody was cautious about for good reason, has proven to be done successfully. So the concerns that we had then, which have changed slightly, yes, I understand most of them moving to indoors. It still is based on this what if. And we have gotten through fall without spreading during practice or during competition. And I think I was happy to hear one of the board members give our students credit, because they have shown that we can trust them. A large majority have shown that we can trust them to make good decisions and be responsible, wear their masks, and be responsible outside of practices and competitions. And they've proven to have been able to do that along with their coaches and staff. I understand wrestling is very unique. The coach, in addition to the PIAA guidelines, the Central League health guidelines, has implemented his own plan with additional precautions that was sent to all of our parents when we had a team Zoom. I'm not sure if it's been forwarded to Mr. Clancy yet, but I'm sure we'd be happy to do that. Something unique with wrestling while indoors, though, is you are typically working with the same partner. So it is not you can be spread out in small 6-foot circles with just 2 people. So you can have the same partner. You do not interact in competition with multiple athletes. You are individually wrestling your one opponent. The postseason, which I know, has been an issue in the fall, is extremely important and unique in wrestling, in the fact that a lot of the sacrifices made in the wrestling season are directly for the postseason. It is a time, the postseason is where kids, wrestlers in particular, see their opportunity for recognition with colleges. You wrestle to get to the postseason. And I know that in, all sports, you want to be a part of the postseason and be, in a championship, but it's very important in wrestling. So I also want to touch on another thing, since we have equity being discussed in the board. This is an issue of equity. We've had this conversation in the fall. We have our students driving around and seeing fields being played on all around them. Yet if they cannot afford to pay to play, they're not having that opportunity. And that is a real issue. And there are, as we've mentioned tonight already, wrestling tournaments that are happening all over the country. You are not hearing from medical experts. You're not reading about, outbreaks, spreading. There's AAU basketball tournaments there. This is something that is going on. And our focus, all of our focus is and should be on our children and our community. And they're relying on us to provide them with sports, extracurricular activities, in-person instruction. These are extremely important, as you all know. There was a recent, there was just a recent study with high school, 3,300 high school students. The Academy of Pediatrics talked on this a little bit. An article just came out on the 13th. And a third of them reported that they're feeling unhappy and they're depressed. And, another one of Dr. Brunner from the Academy of Pediatrics, the development and independence for our children is thwarted, and it's slowed down when they are sitting at home all day with parents in the next room. So while I feel like we can constantly be discussing a lot of things, having our kids, in school still, and I'm glad to hear that we are still being encouraged to at least stick with this hybrid. I'm happy to hear that. I'm thankful for the teachers that are continuing to come in, and some of those whom coach, administration, the principals. I know the last 2 board meetings, we're hearing a lot about teachers and we're hearing a lot about parents, and it's giving this idea, it's feeling like from home that we're against each other. And I feel like we need to be circling back. We're invested in this for the kids. It's absolutely hard for all of us adults, but the way some of the conversation goes is distracting from what is supposed to be the focus of why we're all doing this. So I ask you to be making a decision regarding the sports much sooner than later. And I think that the parents and the students have earned the opportunity to start doing that immediately. We were challenged in the fall, and we met the challenge and successfully. And I think it's hard to try to move the goalposts to why all of a sudden, it definitely can't work. I think we have to have the opportunity to do that. I appreciate the time to talk, and I look forward to seeing our kids still have in-person instruction at the minimum that they do, and to have the opportunity to play their sports. And I just want to end with encouraging parents outside of the sports conversation to advocate for your kids and for the opportunity that your kids also need and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, good evening. If you could just state your name, and you could just say the street address. You don't have to give your house number.
Sure.
And then the microphone is yours.
Hi, my name's Tim Edwards. I live on Brent Drive in Wallingford. And I too tonight showed up like Kelly because I was shocked that sports wasn't on the agenda. I do appreciate the conversation and bringing it up. And I agree with a lot of what Jen said. I mean, pretty much everything. She did say one thing about they haven't been practicing. Well, they have been practicing. And if it hasn't been on their own through years, basically, but most recently in my driveway, I get kids coming in my driveway all the time practicing. We finally got approved by the board to allow our kids to practice outside. That's been going on. Thankfully, most of the days that practices were scheduled, the weather was great, but that's not going to continue. So I do agree with Thomas Pappy. The kids deserve a chance. Give them a chance to have a season. I mean, a lot of what I was gonna say was already brought up because of the conversation, but I think it's really fitting that we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion when I really want to push for, I mean, my sons play basketball. I think voting is timing. We need to vote sooner than later. If we wait to mid-December and only let them play 5 games, not have a postseason, I mean, I think part of the problem, I don't know, is that we talk about diversity. Now we mentioned equity and inclusion, right? And we touched on that. But we talk about diversity and there's no mention of sports. That's mind-boggling to me. I mean, pride, confidence, healthy self-esteem, belonging, diversity, respect. The trait of good teams, the job of the players is to love one another. When you love one another, you play harder in practice. You're going to go the extra mile. And that's any color, any person. I mean, to not have this on the agenda, it's just a disservice to our kids. I mean, not meeting the needs of our students. Behavioral health. I mean, action. Here's an example. So this summer, there was an outdoor summer league played in Sappovitz Park, right? Sappovitz Park. We talk about action, sense of community, right? We're made up of neighborhoods of Swarthmore, Wallingford, Nether Providence, Rutledge. How many times do you get everyone from those neighborhoods in South Media? Really? I mean, sports, action. Now we had that league. You got kids from all different neighborhoods going to South Media, hanging out together and playing. I mean, I think we need to, I'm all for the education, the books, and that's how we presented the diversity, but sports, not only do you meet people you might never come across, become teammates, brothers, learn about their culture, their background, their family, go to their house, have dinner with their families. I think we're overlooking sports in our school district. And it's very upsetting, especially when you take a basketball program that hadn't been to the state tournament in 11 years. They won 3 games, 3-19 the year before. The amount of effort by the parents, by the boosters, by the players, by the coaches, by the teachers in the school. We reached out to the graphic arts teacher. We had posters hung up. She dedicated one of her classes to making posters to hang up and give a sense of pride to our players, to the community. People were coming out to games. Now I know we got hit with the pandemic, but to overlook all the effort that you turn the program around, you get people in the stands. I don't really care about people in the stands at this point. These kids should deserve an opportunity to compete and to compete for the postseason. And if we wait until mid-November or mid-December to start playing and not have a chance to play in the postseason, that is a disservice to our students. And it hurts to even think that sports is an afterthought. You know, I mean, it shouldn't be. There's life lessons in sports, not only diversity, but you go into the working world and you have to work with people from all different backgrounds and you have to collaborate. I just appreciate the fact that you at least brought it up, and I plead that and Kelly, you confirmed the timing. The timing, we could be playing right now. Last year at this time, we started November 15th. It got pushed back, I get it, but I feel like we can't just keep pushing this back. We have to make a decision, and the decision should be to give these kids a chance. So if we can vote on that tonight, if we can vote on that at the latest November 30th, we should be practicing and playing and getting in schedule and in tune with the other Central League teams. All the 5 that were mentioned, plus Marple's going to vote tomorrow, you know, or whenever they're going to vote this week. We should be voting it at a minimum, and I'm for giving the kids a chance to play. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I really do appreciate what Jen said. I mean, the fact that she recognized what was said. I came 2 board meetings ago, and she remembered what I said about the league starting up by the kids. That league was an offshoot of the summer league that got started. We brought the community together through sports, diverse backgrounds, and now you got kids from all different neighborhoods playing in the playground of South Media, where some of those kids probably never been before in their life. And that's in our own community. So I hope we vote to play basketball and give these kids a chance for all the winter sports. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. If you don't mind just stating your name and your address, but you don't have to give your house number, but just the street is fine.
I'm Rhoda O'Donnell, and we live on Brookhaven Road in Wallingford. And I actually came with a different plan about what I wanted to say, but I was listening to the conversation this evening, and I came up with something a little bit different, but that makes the same point. I moved to this neighborhood 20 years ago from Illesheim, Germany, with my 3-year-old, who is now graduated from this district. And our district was always the leader in education and in athletics and in everything else. We were always the leader. We were the first one out the door. We were always the first one out the door. We were not the 5th one, and we were certainly never the 6th one. We are now the 6th one out the door for athletics, and that is not okay with me. That is not the district that I paid to move into and that I pay taxes to live in. That is not okay with me. I moved here for the best life and best education for my children, which I truly believe is 5 days full-time school. Best life, best education for the dollars I pay to be here. I believe that the district is currently out of touch with the expectations of the parents in this district and what we want for our children. Best life, best education, best sports, and also best extracurricular activities. We understand the risks that come with these things, and we have weighed what we think is important in our children's lives. We understand that in 2017, more than 6,000 children committed suicide. We understand in 2018, more than 2,000 children died in motor vehicle accidents. We understand that the risk from COVID is minimal, and we know the CDC numbers, and we expect that our board will also know them. We want our kids in sports because the risks of the other things that are dangerous to our children far outweigh any risk that comes from COVID-19. And we want our board to hear us say that. We are all writing to you, and we were very disappointed that we had to find out from an article in the Swarthmorean what we really thought about going back to school, and we did not hear that from our board members. We want to be back in school. We want our kids to be back in sports, and we are not making bones about it anymore. And you are receiving our emails, and we would like responses to those emails. We would like to know that our voices are being heard. If we would like to talk about equity, let's talk about equity. We should be a leader in equity. My child has been wrestling since September, as well as many of the kids in here who have been playing sports since September. Nobody, there has been zero spread, none. We have been safely doing it. We have the money to do that. Not everybody here has the money to do that in our district. Also, if we're going to talk about equity, let's go to all of the mothers who have had to quit working or take a part-time job so that they could stay home with their children because we are not providing equity of education here. In addition, there are people in our school district that I and you are all aware of that have small children are staying home at home while their parents are at work. What is their equity? How are you providing equity for them? If we as a district are saying that we are interested in equity to check a box, that is not okay with me. And I know that's not okay with a lot of people. We are not box checking people. We need to make it a priority for us. Our kids need sports. Sports keeps them alive and happy. And in my email that I sent to you, And in my many emails, I have addressed equity every time since August. And so you know how I feel about equity. I was a little bit upset that none of the equity that I have mentioned was mentioned in our little presentation about equity, including the equity for the teachers that work in our district that cannot come to work because they do not have childcare. Their kids would be in school in this district, but they're not. I see that we have a whole bunch of teachers that are out on leave, and I'm assuming that there's some teachers that are probably taking advantage of the fact that they can take that medical leave and they need that equity to take care of their children. We need to provide equity for everybody, not just some people. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
David, how are you? Bob
good.
Kelly, Country Club Lane, Wallingford. I think what I'd like to just start off with echoing what some of the other folks said this evening, specifically around extracurricular activities, primarily sports, is the fact that, you know, from a winter sports perspective, as a board, as an athletic department with headed by Mr. Clancy, it's not like we didn't know that this was coming. There is, you know, a schedule to the school year. There's fall sports are over, winter sports start. I think parents understand that there is increased risk with indoor activity. I don't think anybody will dispute that. But what I would say is that athletics, for the most part, has demonstrated, whether that's on the AAU level with indoor basketball, ice hockey, indoor field hockey, whatever indoor sport you're playing, that there's been very few documented cases of a spreader event. There's actually one. Happened in Florida. It was teams from multiple states. It's a fairly large tournament. And there's, what, 22 people on a hockey rink at any given time. All the sports that we have in this district do not meet those qualifications. Basketball is the most 10 people on the court. Swimming, obviously, there's a large group of kids in the pool, but the lanes are almost 10 feet wide. It's been documented by the Swimming Association that it can be done safely. Where I think somebody just set 2 world records the other day, their national event. So I would hope that the board would take that into consideration. And as to the one board member that was talking about choir and music, if we can be done safely and demonstrated safely, I think we should do it. But sports has. My kids have been playing sports all fall, both indoor and outdoor. There's been no event in the state of Pennsylvania, frankly, on the East Coast. So I would hope that you would take that information and use it and apply it. Because delaying the vote, you're robbing these kids of their experience. We all went through high school. I was fortunate enough to play sports. It's a great experience for a number of kids. And by delaying a decision to vote on it, you're robbing them of precious time, whether they're a freshman or a senior. So I think it's important, and I ask you to vote on that tonight, if you can. I really do think that that's important. The other thing I'd like to mention, I think it was mentioned this evening, you talked about possibly having athletes go to 100% online learning. I am very against that. As a parent that has chosen to send their kids to school, I think that you're singling those athletes out by having that even be considered as an option. We're not crossing state lines to play these sports. We're in Delaware County for the most part, with the exception of Lower Merion. So I would hope that that was just a comment and not an actual thought to actually be voted on. Finally, since it's a fairly open forum this evening, as it pertains to, I think what started the open forum was the decision to possibly have to go from a state perspective virtually, 100% virtual. Again, I would like to appreciate the administration, the teachers, and everything they've done. I think we've done a very good job for those kids that do want to attend school, controlling any spread. And I think that we should continue down this path. Obviously, I've addressed the board before. I think it should be a full day school. For those that elected hybrid, I understand there's some complications around that. And I know that a survey was just recently sent out. I would have liked that survey to at least had a question and give parents an option to express their desire to go to a full day school day at the high school level. It was not included. And a number of parents certainly expressed their strong opinions and desire for their kids to have full day school. And I believe it was in plenty of time to be included in the survey. So I just wanted to take this last moment to reinforce that point with the board. Because a number of parents are really having a difficult time. Whether it be scheduling issues, a number of the folks tonight address the emotional issues that people are having. Hey, listen, this has been tough on everybody. I understand it's a tough position we're putting you in. But I just think from a planning perspective, if you can incorporate that into the plan, 2 full days at minimum. If we can do more, great. And do that as soon as possible, because I do think it affects the welfare of the kids. You see your kids going to school. I never thought I'd see the day when all of my kids are excited to go to school in mid-November. It's usually, hey, when's Christmas? When's Thanksgiving? When's break? They don't want break. They want to be in school. So for what it's worth, if you can expedite that planning to try to get to a full day at the high school level, I think it would benefit the community and certainly the kids that have chosen and their families have chosen to go to the hybrid model and in-person learning. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that was it. There's nobody else.
Oh, there's no one else. Thank you. All right. So thank you, everyone, for those comments. We're going to move into our items for action. So the first one we have this evening, is the approval of the November 9th regular business meeting minutes, and I so move. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Matt. Any discussion? All right, Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Ballas?
Aye.
Ms. Semino?
Aye.
Dr. Downey?
Aye.
Dr. Huff?
Aye.
Mr. Cudis?
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz?
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman?
Aye.
Dr. Grandy?
Aye.
Dr. Grandy, the motion passes 9-0.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fagora. That takes us to personnel. We have 13 items for action. Are there any items on the list anyone would like to separate from the rest? Okay. We have the approval of 2 retirements. Ferg Abbott, Director of Human Resources and Operations, and Cheryl Sweeney Foy, Confidential Executive Administrative Assistant in the Human Resources Department. We have the approval of 4 appointments. Vincent Shakora, Building Substitute at West. Joyce Thayer, a Family and Consumer Sciences teacher at the middle school. Lisa Lindgren, an English Language Arts teacher and Building Substitute at the high school. And Janine Opper, an English Language Arts teacher and Building Substitute at the high school. We have the approval of 11 leaves of absence as listed in the agenda. We have the approval of compensation and administration of the SAT on October 14th, 2020 for Danielle Camacho. How you say her last name, Lisa. Camacello, okay. And Valerie Perella, as stipulated. We have approval of stipends for school nurses to perform COVID-related duties as stipulated. We have the approval of professional development planning work as stipulated at an hourly rate of $37 per hour. We have the approval of transportation change of hours effective October 1st, 2020 as stipulated. We have the approval of one change of assignment for Kate Evans as stipulated. We have the approval of an additional staff member as a mentor during the 2020-2021 school year as stipulated. We have the approval of the special education teaching professional to work on curriculum development at the rate of $37 per hour for an additional 36 hours during the 2020 summer. And we have the approval of an addition to the 2020-2021 fall athletic supplementals. All items in the section are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Kelly Walkman.
Thank you, Kelly. Do we have a second?
Second, Jerry Ballas.
Thank you, Jerry. Any discussion? All right, I'll just mention that I'm thinking ahead to the end of the year when Ferg Abbott normally goes through all the retirements in the district and wondering what we're going to do at that time since Ferg is retiring. So sad to see that on the agenda, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cudis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
Personnel motion A through L passes 9-0.
Thank you, Ms. Fagora. So that takes us to curriculum. There are 3 items listed for action. The third being related to the WSSD Health and Safety Plan. I'd like to start with the first 2 items, unless someone would like to separate those 2 from one another for any reason. Okay. First, we have approval of related services provider contracts as stipulated. And second, we have approval of an educational service agreement as described. Both of the items are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Kelly Walkman.
Thank you, Kelly. Do we have a second?
Second, Chapin Semino.
Thanks, Chapin. Any discussion? All right, Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cudis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
Curriculum items A and B pass 9-0.
All right. And then, as I mentioned, we have this placeholder, but I want to, there's no specific motion there listed, but I did want to bring forward the motion related to this attestation requirement that we learned of today from the state, which is an attestation ensuring implementation of mitigation efforts. And the motion would read as the following. A motion for the Board of School Directors to continue with in-person hybrid instruction and authorize the board president and superintendent to sign the PDE form entitled Attestation Ensuring Implementation of Mitigation Efforts. This form, once executed, shall become part of the WSSD Health and Safety Plan. Further, the Board of School Directors directs the superintendent to post the WSSD Health and Safety Plan inclusive of this attestation on its website and to file the same with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So I guess if I'm making that motion, it's just a second at that point, correct? Do I have a second?
Second.
Jennifer Lentz.
I think we got Matt. Thank you, Matt. And thanks, Jen. Any discussion? Okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Marilyn.
Would this be the appropriate time to encourage the district to move to all virtual for the high school following Thanksgiving?
I think that would be better as a separate motion, because I think if, yeah, if you don't mind, could we just treat those separately?
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cudis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Miss Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
The motion passes 9-0.
All right, thank you. So Marilyn, it sounds like you had a motion you wanted to bring forward.
Yes, I would like to make a motion that we move the high school to all virtual education with the exception of students with complex learning needs for 2 weeks following the Thanksgiving holidays. Because the transmission rate among high school students tends to track that of the general population, whereas for younger students it tends to be lower, and that the risks are quite high.
All right, excuse me. Do we have a second? All right, there's no second, so that motion will not come forward. Do we have any other motions in this section of the agenda?
Dave, I don't know if it's in the form of a motion, but I would propose that we meet a week from now or either Sunday or Monday, because the sports issue is time sensitive. I'm not sure. I think I'm under the right part of the agenda, but I don't think we should wait until our December 7th meeting to address this issue.
Okay, this is the right part of the agenda. I guess my question is, we could certainly schedule a special meeting. And I know this isn't like a time for lengthy process discussion, but the other option would be to consider it now. Are you suggesting we wait?
I would have no problem considering it now, but I'm getting a sense from my fellow board members that they are not prepared to consider it tonight, which is why I suggested a week from now, 6 days from now.
Okay.
Can we at least tonight consider the start of practice
We can.
for these sports?
We can certainly consider.
And then
some
a week or 2 weeks down the road, decide on competition?
Yeah, there would be no competitions until.
Correct.
If my understanding is correct, I think.
Until after the next board meeting.
Yeah. So we could, Marilyn, I see your hand is up. Was that from before?
It is not from before, and it is also not related to athletics. I don't know if we want to get my other motion out of the way before we tackle athletics.
Sure. While people are thinking about the athletics question, go ahead with your motion.
So my motion would be to amend the health and safety plan to allow families and students at the elementary level to transition between the online academy and the hybrid education on a monthly basis rather than only at the each semester.
So you were saying at all levels?
I believe at the middle school and high school level, they already have that ability. So I just want to add it for the elementary school, but at a monthly basis.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Second from Chapin. Discussion. I would just jump in here, and then I see Kelly's hand just went up as well. Oh, and then Matt, I keep forgetting to look up, sorry. I know at the elementary school we have very particular challenges with kids moving back and forth, particularly as we place value on keeping students with their teachers. And so, Dr. Palmer, would you mind me asking the question about what the logistical issues are with the elementary school compared to middle and high school, with students being able to switch on a monthly basis into the online academy and back?
You know, as Dr. Huff brought the motion forward, I was thinking, how could we even do that on a monthly basis? Because when we sectioned the elementary schools, we were very careful to be able to have them with their teacher for a half a year. And to move them on a monthly basis, we'll reshuffle the classes, because we were particularly careful with our class sizes, whether we were in-person classes or we were online classes. We observed the class size guidelines. I don't know how to move the children with more frequency. It would mean rebalancing all of the classes and moving the children again. I'm sure there are ways to mitigate it, but I'm at a loss to think of them right now. I am thinking ahead of what we have proposed for even January. And I know some parents are even saying that's difficult to have to make a decision in advance of the timeline that we were talking about for January. But it does mean rebalancing all of those classes. There's not slack in the classes. That's just off the top of my head.
Thank you. So let's go to Matt, and then Kelly will come to you.
So that actually dovetails and covers most of my question, but why don't we face that same issue, Dr. Palmer, at the other levels? Why don't we need to reshuffle classes when kids switch back and forth?
At the middle school and the high school, the kids are already in their particular class, and whether they are coming in virtually or in the classroom, they're entering the same class. Like the teacher, just like we did tonight, we're still the same 9 people scheduled for the same class. The way we handled it at the elementary school is this particular group of children who might have been in the online academy had Teacher Sullivan. In the opposite, if this group of children were in school, they had Teacher Figura. If we're going back and forth, there aren't extra seats in those classes. Or even if there are a few, you're switching a teacher. At the middle school and the high school, you're in your grade. It may have been with your teacher, but it didn't matter whether you're coming in virtually or in person. You're still scheduled with that cohort of children.
Okay, so my kids are all the hybrid, the in-person people, and so I wasn't realizing that the middle school and high school that are all online are still getting the same teachers. There's not different online teachers for the middle school and the high school level?
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Kelly?
We ended up covering my question, so no further question for me.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll just say, I completely understand the motivation behind the motion, but I think from a practical logistical perspective, the disruptions to our instructional model from moving students back and forth in that sort of way is not something I'd be inclined to support. Any other comments, discussion? Okay, Ms. Figura, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Cudis,
Nay.
Mrs. Lentz,
Nay.
Mr. Sullivan,
Nay.
Mrs. Walkman,
Nay.
Mr. Ballas,
Nay.
Ms. Semino.
Nay.
I'm sorry, is that a yay or a nay?
No, it was a
Thank
negative.
you. Thank you. Dr. Downey,
Nay.
Dr. Huff,
Yes.
Dr. Grandy.
Nay.
Dr. Grandy, the motion fails 8-1.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fagora. Do we have other motions anyone would like to bring forward? Okay, I would propose that we at least begin to answer this question this evening about athletics. I realize everybody may not be fully resolved on the question of competition at this point and the timing of competition. But I'm not sure that coming back a week from today, that there'll be a lot of new information to make this decision. So others may disagree with that timing. But I would like to bring a motion forward. And I think I'm certainly sensing some reticence among the board to move this forward. So I want to try to find some sort of way to bring something forward that I think can get support. So, and people can certainly amend, but let me read through the motion. Be a motion for the Board of School Directors to approve the implementation of the PIAA Return to Competition Plan for winter sports as part of the WSSD Health and Safety Plan for Athletics with the following conditions. The county superintendents, along with the Central Athletic League, will continue to discuss and make decisions regarding initiation and continuation of winter sports schedules. The board and administration is aware of the revised masking order from the Department of Health issued on November 17th and continues to monitor the application of this masking order to athletics, particularly to swimming and wrestling. The order allows for an exception to masking due to safety concerns, as well as if the wearing of a mask would impede breathing, such as in swimming, or present other specific safety concerns relative to wearing a mask during some portion of the athletic activity, such as during wrestling competitions. The order as it relates to athletics continues to be clarified by the Pennsylvania Department of Health, as well as legal interpretation by school solicitors of allowable exceptions under this order. The administration will continue to comply with any Pennsylvania Department of Health order and will continue to follow clarification and legal direction on this matter. The third qualification is that athletes who choose to participate in the winter sports program transition to virtual school attendance when practices begin to include live drilling in which distancing of 6 feet or more with masks cannot be achieved, and will continue to attend school virtually until 14 days after the last competition, at which point the athletes can select to return to in-person hybrid learning. Coaching recommendations will be finalized before the first practice will commence. And I would also suggest practices commencing on December 7th. And so that's my motion. Is there a second?
Is it appropriate to make a motion to amend that motion, or are we just approving or disproving your motion?
So Mr. Berman can correct me, but I think what would happen is we would second the motion, and at the initiation of discussion, someone can make a motion to amend, and then that motion can be discussed and voted on. And then depending on what happens to that motion, we're either discussing a amended motion or the original motion. Is that correct, Mr. Berman?
That is correct.
Okay. So we would need to have a second, and then we would need to have motions to amend as part of that discussion.
I'll second Kelly Walkman.
Thank you, Kelly. Discussion. And I'll just say again, I'm putting forward the motion. From the earlier discussion, I think people have a lot of, understandable worry, about the risk associated with winter indoor sports. I think that I'm in favor of trying to come to some resolution this evening to provide some clarity and certainty to our athletes. At the same time, I think I also recognize from our earlier discussion that I think that having some additional mitigation measures in place compared to our fall outdoor sports is necessary. Jen?
Thank you, Dr. Grandy. So I have a question and perhaps a motion. The first point that you read, and you read quite a bit. In fairness, we have copies of your motion. So I am looking at the part that says county superintendents, along with the Central Athletic League, will continue to discuss and make decisions regarding the initiation/continuation of winter sports schedules. Could you clarify what you mean by that? Does that mean that Dr. Palmer would be in the driver's seat of making the decisions on whether winter sports go forward and to what extent? Is that unilateral?
No, I think that the general point, and I'll ask Dr. Palmer to weigh in, but the general point is that the Central Athletic League has yet to really firm up specific plans, and I don't think we need to convene the board to approve some competition schedule or something along those lines, or a specific parameters. Certainly, I don't anticipate any competition happening before our December 7th meeting. So if the situation in the community were to change, there was new information, and the board didn't feel comfortable with proceeding with competition, there would be the opportunity to do so. But I think the conversation is very fluid with all the schools in the Central League about what the intent is around even scheduling competitions at this point. Dr. Palmer, is that fair to say? Okay.
Okay, if that's what that means, then I understand. Thank you for clarifying. I would make, the third portion, which says athletes who choose to participate in the winter sports program shall transition to virtual school attendance when practices begin to include live drilling, in which distancing of 6 feet or more with masks cannot be achieved, and will continue to attend school virtually until 14 days after the last competition, at which point the athletes can select to return to in-person hybrid learning. If I read that right, it's basically saying anyone who chooses to participate in a winter sport will have to go virtual. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I would make a motion to delete that point in its entirety. And the reason is because it's not that I don't understand the motivation for that point. I understand the rationale behind it, but I think the execution of that is problematic. I think that it again goes back to an equity issue. We are forcing our kids, first of all, to be treated differently than any other kids that may participate in a live extracurricular program. For example, drama, if that ends up being in person in the winter, I understand that's a winter activity, or anything else that's similar to that. We're treating our athletes differently. And that's my first point on equity. My second point on equity is that again goes back to the pay to play issue, which means that kids that want to play, but also want to go to in-person school, which I think many studies have shown can be a more effective learning model for many kids, not all, but certainly more than the majority, are going to be able to pay and play their sport and still go to in-person school. And the kids that cannot afford that are going to be boxed into playing sports for our school and then having to choose between an education that could change the trajectory for them. I don't think that lends itself to our equity vision for this school. So I would make a motion to delete that third paragraph in fairness to our students, that we're treating everyone as they should be and equally or equitably, excuse me.
I'll second that.
We have a second from Matt. So it's open for discussion. So again, the motion is to amend the prior motion, which would be to delete the third point of the 5 that I included. Kelly.
So I am in favor of keeping the original proposed language that would require the athletes to move to the online academy for a few reasons, but most importantly, I believe strongly, based on conversations with many parents or interaction with many parents via email, that there are those who are currently participating in the cohort model who will feel quite uncomfortable knowing that we have athletes participating in-person competition at this time when the rates are so high in our community, that they would be doing that inside. And in some instances, the competition would potentially be taking place unmasked. And so I think, in all fairness to those parents and students who want to participate in person, but feel that the risk is too high, that this is an undue burden to place on those parents who and those children who may feel that they need to then self-select out of the cohort model. And as a member of the DEI committee, I fully recognize the issues of equity with sports, but I would also argue that from an equity perspective, the safety of the in-person learning is our primary responsibility as a school board, and it needs to be prioritized as the top priority of our district, as it should be.
Other discussion? I think what Kelly said has a lot of validity around how other students and all of our teachers and staff, the risk that they worry about in terms of all of this happening during a period of time with rapidly increasing rates in the community. And so I completely appreciate that we had a very successful fall season. I was very supportive of that fall season. And I also do want to create opportunities for our winter athletes, but I do think we're in a different situation now than what we were in the fall, both in terms of the activities themselves, but also the environment as it exists today. Any other discussion, or we'll move to a vote? Okay, so we're taking a roll call vote on Jen's amendment to the motion, which is to strike the third bullet, which again, in summary, relates to virtual attendance in school during winter athletics. Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Nay.
Mr. Ballas,
Nay.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
Nay. Sorry.
Dr. Huff,
Nay.
Mr. Cudis,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy,
Nay.
the motion fails 5-4.
All right. Just making notes. We're back to discussion of the original motion.
Yeah, I have a question on the motion. You mentioned starting practice on the 7th. Is there any reason why we wouldn't consider starting practice on the 30th instead? Is there some significance between the 7th and the 30th regarding the motion?
I think that, the reasoning I had there was related to some of the concerns that Marilyn raised earlier about Thanksgiving and related travel and holiday gatherings, and waiting till December 7th would allow us a little bit of time away from some of those gatherings and travel.
I understand.
At least for indoor practices. Certainly, the outdoor practicing as it exists today could resume.
And my understanding from what I heard earlier is the 30th, and if we wait till the 30th, it does not curtail anything regarding participation in competition. Is that correct?
If we wait till the 30th or the 7th, or specifically the 30th?
The 7th, I apologize.
7th.
If we wait as the motion was stated, it does not cause any difficulty for any of the competitions. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't know if Mr. Clancy is still on, but that was what we heard earlier as it relates to postseason eligibility, as well as a number of games that could be achieved, as well as I think some of the start dates. It's not that far off from some of the start dates of our peers.
So just to clarify, if we were to start on December 7th, you need 3 weeks of practice before the first competition. So we would not be able to have a competition until after New Year's. And if we held firm to closing the building during the 2 weeks of winter break, the first competition then would be January 9th if we start on the 7th. So that would cut out a couple of games, but most of the season would be intact.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Clancy, it's 3 weeks of practice.
So you need 15 practices over the course of 19 days. I reached out to District 1 just to clarify, it does not need to be 19 consecutive days. So for example, our colleagues in Montgomery County, some of them started with tryouts last week, and then that cut off the first 3 days of practice for whenever they're allowed to return under Montgomery County's rules. So for our purposes, if we started the 7th, we would be able to get 10 practices, maybe 11 or 12 before we close for winter break. And then after winter break, we could return. One of the new rules the PIAA put in, anytime a team must take off for 3 days or more, they must have 3 days of practice before a return competition as well. That's really more for if a team has to quarantine, they don't want them taking 2 weeks off and then rushing back to a game. So I'm mentioning that because any way we break it, if we're taking off for winter break, there's going to need to be a 3-day gap before competition.
And so a November 30th start date allows for competition before the winter recess.
A November 30th start date for practice would mean the game that we have scheduled on December 18th could take place. And we have a game scheduled for December 22nd as well. Now, taking a quick peek at the opponents as to our opponents' availability based on their school boards right now. We're scheduled to open on the 18th with Marple Newtown, and the 22nd is scheduled against Pencrest. So Pencrest we know is around. Marple Newtown, we believe they're going to have their board meeting later this week. So we'll find out about their availability. But if we started the 30th, we would be able to complete all 16 basketball games. We would get all 8 dual wrestling matches in, all 7 swim meets. If we start a week later, it cuts us down to 5 swim meets, 7 wrestling matches, and 12 basketball games.
And another question, would we, if we practice, guarantee social distancing and mask at all times throughout the practice?
First of all, there would be guarantees of masking throughout the practice for basketball because we expect that will be a protocol used throughout games and the like. In terms of can we maintain 6 feet social distance through practice, I would say for some of the earlier practices when we're doing skill development, we have dribbling, shooting, things like that, we probably could start with extra protocols in place, but eventually for wrestling and basketball, they are going to need to teach the specific skills that you would use, for wrestling and defensive plays and things like that for basketball, where they would need to be a little closer together at some point. Now, if the board had to put some restrictions in the earlier practices, I'm sure our coaches would be willing to work with that.
Jerry, did you have anything else?
I'm debating whether to make an amendment to your motion to move it to the 30th, and I will do that, see how the board feels. I would like to amend to move from the 7th to the 30th.
To November 30th.
Right.
I second that.
Second by Larry. Okay, discussion. Kelly, is that a hand for
Yeah,
this, or that was?
Yes, it is. And I wanted to ask a question of Dr. Palmer. I know that we have not had the in-school transmission of COVID, but I know that at the same time, due to gatherings that happened outside of school, we ended up having to quarantine members or large portions of a few of our sports teams. I was wondering if you could comment on which sports teams, how many of them had to be quarantined at some point during the fall season?
Now I'm having difficulty recalling it. I know there was
sorry.
there was one in particular because there were a large group of children. I want to say, I believe there were 2 large quarantines, and then the other ones were individuals on the team, but I'm not 100% sure. I can only vividly recall the one, maybe 2.
Okay.
I believe there was one team that was quarantined twice as a team. And then there was 2 other teams that faced quarantines towards the end of their season.
Thank you, Pat.
The other one, the 2 other teams with single incidents, it was single cases, single positive incidents on the team. And when we went through the discovery and went through the Chester County Health Department, they recommended the whole team quarantine. But we are not aware of any transmissions from those cases.
Okay. I asked the question primarily because, again, as we consider the fact that we're coming off the holiday, we know that we have a large number of students, unfortunately, and families that seem to be traveling for Thanksgiving, as the students have been indicating such and communicating as such to their teachers. So it concerns me considerably to move immediately back into practice immediately post the holiday.
Marilyn, did you have your hand up for this one?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I agree with Kelly's concern there because by November 30th, the students will have no idea and no way to have been tested since Thanksgiving to know if they are COVID positive or not. And if we start practice that soon, I think we are setting up those teams for potential quarantine.
Just to clarify, this, if our student athletes travel, they would be subject to the same exact 14-day quarantine requirement that we talked about earlier. And so I think that's part of the equation here. And I hadn't thought about that at the moment, but when I made the motion, but I would actually be inclined to support the modification that Jerry has put forward based on that. I see Jen's hand up.
Actually, Dave, that's what I was going to say as well. I mean, it's a state guideline that you need to quarantine for 14 days if you are traveling. So that's what they would be doing if they were traveling, or a negative test. I mean, that's where it stands right now. And that's a state guidelines. So thank you, Dave. You said what I was going to say.
Okay.
Dr. Grandy.
Dave is fine.
Can we clarify about the state guidelines? Are the state guidelines related to only interstate travel, or does it also include intrastate travel?
Interstate only. So Yes, leaving Pennsylvania, coming back to Pennsylvania.
Okay, so if you're visiting family in 5 hours away in the middle of, or on the western side of Pennsylvania, you don't have to quarantine. Is that what we're saying?
Correct. That's the state requirement.
Could
Okay.
we set a stricter requirement?
What I would say is, if you want to suggest that we entertain it separately. Is there any other discussion on Jerry's motion, or can we move to a vote? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Staring at my computer.
Start jumping
Yeah.
and waving.
Go ahead,
Just
Matt.
a couple of observations. One, I'm actually more worried about practice than I am competition. I think of the swimming context, and I'm more worried about the kids who are sharing lanes in practice than I am in competition, where you get up on the blocks, race your race, and get out and put your mask back on. But I also think that the reason we're taking this up tonight is to get practices underway. And so bumping up the timing to the 30th makes sense to me. If we wanted to wait and see where the data goes, then we could just vote on the 7th when we meet anyway. And then my last observation is just, if we pass this because Jen's modification didn't pass, it means the second swimming practices start, the whole swim team is going to be forced into virtual learning. That seems a bit draconian to me, but it is what it is.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up, so we're going to take a roll call vote on Jerry's motion to change the date at which practices may commence from December 7th to November 30th.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Nay.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Nay.
Mr. Cudis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
The motion passes 7-2.
All right. So that takes us back to now the original motion, which has now been amended. Just testing all my procedural knowledge here. So it's the original motion. The only thing that has changed is the practice date starting November 30th instead of December 7th. Any discussion on that, Marilyn?
So I have a question in that we get district level information from the Chester County Health Department about COVID incidence rates every week on Fridays. And this past Friday, our rate was 260 per 100,000 residents, and the week before it was 160 per 100,000 residents. And I presume we will also get data this Friday or Saturday, even though it is the holiday. And if that rate were to rise dramatically, would that impact the decision to resume practices on November 30th?
As it stands, no. But I don't know if that was a question for me.
Well, can I ask the follow-up to that then? Which
Sure.
would be, for me, what's the end game then? Yeah, if we continue to see rates go up, are we going to be looking, like now we look for, are we seeing transmission within the schools? Are we going to be looking for transmission within the sports team, or are we going to be pulling the plug earlier based on, broader concerns than that? What's going to be our
yeah.
metric for ending the sports season if we needed to?
I think it's always hard. I know everybody wants like a very specific decision point, and I would love to have that. But in general, I think that it's a little hard to say. But I would imagine if we started having cases on our teams are quarantined, they can't play. If we start seeing widespread cases in other teams, suggesting that the activities themselves in the context of the rates that we have in the community are leading to outbreaks on sports teams in general, I think those would be the kind of broad considerations that at least I personally would think about at that moment in time. I think just an absolute rate in the community is not necessarily
Yeah,
like
sorry, I didn't mean to suggest there was some bright line we should be setting. I'm just wondering, A, what's the framework? What's the matrix we're going to look at for that decision? And B, is it even, are we the ones that are going to be making that decision? Are we going to need to meet again to vote? Or is that something that Mr. Clancy and Dr. Palmer are going to be able to decide in the interim?
Well, there's always the opportunity that we've empowered the administration if there's a acute health concern, safety concern, to implement measures and bring them back to the board. So if they need to happen in a timely fashion, then it is something the administration would be able to do. Ultimately, it needs to come back to the board.
Do we need to make that part of this motion, or is that just standard procedure that power is there?
We made that standard procedure, correct? 2 meetings ago, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
So no, there's no specific action that needs to be taken to make that a reality. Mr. Berman?
Yes. So I just wanted to point out that earlier in this meeting, you were authorized to sign off with the superintendent on what PD is calling an attestation. What that does, among other things, is it reaffirms the district's agreement to follow the Department of Health guidelines. So in the event that certain milestones get triggered, you would end up having to follow those guidelines regardless. So it doesn't actually require further board action in that regard.
Okay. Any other discussion on this before we have a roll call vote?
Are we back to the original motion, not, well, the amended motion, but the full motion at this point?
Exactly. All right. Ms. Fagora, can you? I don't see any hands, right?
I'm sorry, Dave, can you clarify that again? Like what?
Oh, sure. So this was
we-
the long motion that I read before. As I read it, but with the one modification that practices may commence November 30th as opposed to December 7th.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right. Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mrs. Walkman,
Nay.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
We couldn't hear you, Michelle.
Aye. Thank you. Dr. Huff,
No.
Mr. Cudis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
I'm going to vote aye, but I am vehemently against making these athletes attend school virtually. And I hope it's something that we can revisit. I think that is a terrible part of this motion for so many reasons, but I don't want to hold up these sports, so I'll vote aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
Dr. Grandy, the motion passes 7-2.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Fagora. Are there any other motions in curriculum? If not, we're going to move to finance. Okay, onward to finance. So we have 6 items for approval in finance. Are there any on the list anyone would like to separate from the rest? Okay. First, we have approval of payment of invoices to vendors dated October 21st through November 17th, 2020. We have acknowledgement of receipt of the financial statements as stipulated. We have approval of the October 2020 Treasurer's Report. We have approval of the 2020-2021 budget transfers as stipulated. We have acknowledgement of a donation from the class of 2024 in the amount of $1,120 to help pay for a water bottle filler at King Field. We have an approval of an agreement with Thomas Stecker and Associates to perform an equity audit as stipulated and as described in the focus topic earlier. All items in the section are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So move, Jerry Ballas.
Thank you, Jerry. Do we have a second?
Second, Kelly Walkman.
I got you, Matt. Any discussion? All right, Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cudis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
All right. So this takes us to our second time for audience recognition, but I think we already covered audience recognition. Oh, is it? Okay. Hi, good evening. If you could just, I'm over here, state your name, address, just street address is fine, and then you can go ahead.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Good evening. I'm Robert Cristaldi Jr. of Putnam Boulevard in Wallingford. I'm a junior at Strathaven High School, and I think in some ways I can provide a unique experience that this board has not yet seen, considering I have been to the high school before COVID came. First and foremost, I want to thank the WSSD teachers, staff, and families for rising to past challenges and the ones who are rising to this one. This time, though, I'm disappointed by WSSD's performance in handling the crisis. I love Strathaven, and I'm proud to tell people that I go to this fabulous district. But I think this year has been terrible from the start. I'd like to focus on asynchronous Wednesdays and the half days and the school schedule. For asynchronous Wednesdays, I have seen and heard students, staff, families, and parents stand at this podium and say they are necessary, needed, and important for the district's teachers, parents, and families. I think they're a loud minority, and personally, I have seen some teachers never post on Wednesdays, and I lose a whole day of learning, and then they complain every other day of the week that they don't have enough time to teach the lessons that they need to teach. For each week, asynchronous work for me takes less than 60 minutes combined for all 4 classes on a good day. Sometimes there's nothing to do at all. I'm just disappointed. Yes, it's supposed to be a teacher workday, but teachers have never needed it before, so why do they need it now? It doesn't make sense or add up. Many parents have sat at their kitchen tables or on their couches and looked at this podium, listening to the people speaking, thinking about how necessary they are, and wondering this very question, where were they before? It just can't be now that they need these days. Don't be afraid to say it. Wednesdays are not school days. They are days off every single time. The consequences of having us learning on Zoom, not even on Zoom, is too great. We lost 65 days of learning this spring, and at our current rate, we will have lost another 36 by June 2021. Combined, that is 101 school days, and that's more than half a school year. While yes, we've had work in the spring, it was just asynchronous work, which wasn't real school. This means over half a year of instruction will be lost at our current rate in June 2021. So that means I would have, compared to before, I would have only been through the middle of 11th grade, not the end. While we can't make up for this lost time, we can easily save the future. And this doesn't include the fact that us students at Strathaven High School only spend 4.5 hours for 4 days, 4.5 hours per day, 4 days a week for instruction compared to 6 or 6.5, 5 days a week like before. There are 180 school days this year. Take out the 36 asynchronous Wednesdays accounted for already, and there are 144 remaining. We miss at least 1.5 hours of school every day compared to before. This means we miss 216 hours of instruction, and that's roughly equal to the 36 school days, which adds to the previously mentioned 101, making it 137 days lost during the pandemic by June 2021. Make no mistake, we are lagging behind, not just a little, a lot. We need 80-minute blocks every day, all 5 days a week, just like before. Right now, it appears teachers are only working 4 days a week. Taxpayers are not asking for a 1/5 reduction in their taxes. They're simply asking for the same quality education they got before. It is certain we are currently not. My teachers are constantly rushing through lessons saying we are getting the truncated version instead of the full lesson. This is disappointing, and the taxpayers know this and they see it and they don't like it. They know teachers aren't teaching as much, and therefore my prediction is if you don't give us the education we deserve, they will seriously demand tax reductions. Their patience is running thin, and I know mine is. As for half days, I've looked at the schedule over and over again, and every aspect of it does not make sense. School starts on different days. Each day at different times and ends on different times. Lunches are on different times. Classes are at different times, and there's no consistency. It's a strain on all the parents of this hardworking school district. Not all the parents can be home when their child comes home from school and can never work their schedule around this one. As for half days, it doesn't make sense that the middle and elementary school can do it, but we can't. It would be so easy. We need at least 2 full in-person days of instruction learning, and hopefully we can get to 3, 4, or 5 this spring. I know there are concerns for spaces for lunches, but the high school has a library, a cafeteria, an outside space if it's a nice day, and it has a gym if there's no classes being run in there. You could bring back the A, B, and C lunches to space out students even more. And I can't see why we can't do this. If we can spend the time to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and they take the time we spend on that project, we might just have 2 full days. Another consequence of the half-day system is no one bothered to pay attention to the school zone flashing sign on Providence and Brookhaven Road. There was almost a crash on Brookhaven Road this time last week by the high school because my school bus was making a left without the protection of a flashing school zone sign because it was 10:30, not 2:30. The car was traveling at least 40 miles per hour, which is the designated speed limit, and that area also has a pedestrian crosswalk. Buses have horns, children don't. If I was walking to or from school and I needed to cross the street at 10:30 a.m., whether I'm coming to or from, I'd be very nervous. This is a result of our half-day schedule. I digress. The important part is we're not getting the instruction this district promised like when I joined it 12 years ago. I could have gone somewhere else, but I didn't. Services I needed were provided here, and this is one of the best schools in the country. Don't make my family regret this choice. My overall experience has been okay at best. I already talked about the half days, the asynchronous Wednesdays, but I haven't talked about the actual experience. The hallways are divided like a highway, and even then they're rarely obeyed. It's been done in grocery stores across this country. No, it doesn't work. Just take them off the floor. We are told not to turn our heads to face our friends 6 feet apart, even just for a second. On Zoom, we never have a chance to speak to other students or get updates on each other's lives like we did before. Helping a friend by sliding the pencil 6 feet across the floor to share it is discouraged. I'm confident we can remove some of these obsessive restrictions and we can make school feel more normal again. Is it possible that this school board is deliberately making things difficult by refusing to share data, making in-person education feel more alien, and driving us to Zoom classes because you are afraid of the teachers union, whom I have been searching for, has been pushing for all virtual? Yes, folks at home, teachers have been telling me the union has been pushing for all virtual against the will of this district's taxpayers. But in trying to appease the teachers union, I believe you have abandoned 2 principles that school has. 1, to provide excellent education, and 2, to allow students to foster and grow friendships with our peers. Point 1 is not being satisfied and neither is 2. If we can't even get the 2 basic straight, what's the point? We might as well give up. I also wanted to comment on the board's consideration to return to all virtual, which happily has been declined for now. The time to do it is not now. It definitely won't be in a few weeks. Everyone in the district, staff, teachers, students, we're all wearing masks, social distancing, and washing our hands and staying safe. We still have the ability to contact trace, and students are filling out the symptom tracker. Most importantly, there has been no zero transmission that we know of between student or staff at the high school since October 12th, when hybrid learning began. The time to turn around and doubt ourselves is definitely not now. Finally, I wanted to say something our community is feeling. Some have already expressed this sentiment, but it doesn't feel like you've heard us. Our community is suffering. My friends are suffering. I am suffering. We just want to go back to school, and we want to be there for at least 2 days a week. Let those who don't want to go to the online academy, but don't punish us for wanting an education. Some of us just want to go to our friends and learn from our teachers who can, will, and have supported us during this time. We want to go back to school. And to conclude, in the last board meeting, one administrative official said that we should get more in school time by using the 5th block. This person knows who they are and knows that doesn't make sense. And I was disgusted when I heard it. It really shows some people don't understand, and I'm very disappointed. You can do better than that, school board. Don't let us down. Don't let me down. The risks are worth the reward. They are. Thank you for listening, and good evening.
Thank you. All right, I don't think we have any other comments. So that takes us to school board reports. Do we have any reports for members serving on district subcommittees or out-of-district roles? Okay. Do we have any old business? Jen?
Sorry, new business.
Okay. New business, you're up.
Okay. Yes, Mrs. Garfinkel wrote a lengthy letter tonight, and I just want to make sure that she's going to be followed up with. I know that she didn't discuss things that were addressed at this board meeting, but I think that the issues she raises in her letter, which is this crunch time for a 6-year-old in 1st grade to get her assignments in by Christmas to get the points, is something that needs to be addressed. So I'm wondering how we're going to address that. Is there a plan?
Dr. Palmer, is that something to be followed up on?
Ms. Lentz, I will definitely follow up on it. My initial reaction is to speak with Mr. Savage.
Thank you.
Any other new business? Okay. I just want to say, I know this is not an easy meeting. We had to work through a lot of difficult decisions. And I know there are many, many competing demands that we're trying to address with keeping kids in school as best and long as we can, and also creating these extracurricular opportunities as well. So I just appreciate all the difficult conversations this evening. I appreciate the board working together to try to come to some resolution and make some decisions for our students. So anyway, I just want to express that again. I know it's late and I know it was a very long meeting, but I do appreciate everyone hanging in there and working through these issues. And with that, thank you again, and this meeting is adjourned.